This episode of How To Wrestling was requested by Alex Thompson, one of our lovely backers over at patreon.com/How To Wrestling. For as little as $5 a month, you can support the show and get access to monthly pay-per-view reviews or our ongoing and extremely fun side series Pay-Per-View Classic, where we go back and look at classic wrestling pay-per-views from all sorts of different walks of life. Recently, the World Bodybuilding Federation was dropped here on the main timeline, and as well as that, over on the feed now on Patreon, we've got WrestleMania 10, we've got No Way Out 2003, December to December 2006, Survivor Series 1998, WrestleMania 21. It is absolutely quite the selection and a lot of fun, easily our favorite series. And we do have spots available now. If you have got a project, a podcast, a series of your own, a thing that you would like to advertise to all of our lovely listeners here on How To Wrestling, head us up over at patreon.com/How To Wrestling or howtowrestling@gmail.com, subject sponsorship. But for now, that's enough chatter. Business is about to pick up, and Boomer Soomer, by the way, it's time for How To JR. Friends, and welcome to another episode of How To Wrestling, the world's first podcast detailing how to wrestling, how to get into wrestling, how to understand wrestling, and goodness knows, maybe even how to enjoy wrestling. And Boomer Soomer, it's me, your old pal, good old KM, joined as I am always by Joklahoma's favorite daughter, it's Jo Graham.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm excited. This is a banner episode, quite an important one.
Yes.
It's not every day we get to talk about the voice of professional wrestling.
That would be a very different podcast.
Why, if every day we talk every episode?
Yeah, How To JR is the name of the podcast, and each episode is just, I don't know, about something different.
Each episode is a review of the latest episode of his podcast.
That would be awful.
It's a nice little cycle. As long as he keeps going, we can keep going. Like,
I'm mad. Look, everyone listening, thank us right now that isn't the podcast. Imagine that.
What,
could have been the podcast.
A podcast review podcast.
Podcast review of a wrestler's podcast.
I mean, I think if we get to the meta point where we're having podcast review podcasts, like, you know.
That would be an interesting line on my LinkedIn. Like, a professional wrestling podcast, a wrestling podcast.
No, what it'll be is, like, you know, all the wrestlers, they all kind of retire and they all start becoming podcasters. What it'll be is all those professional podcasters will retire and we'll do podcasts about other podcasts. Yeah. That's what it'll be. It's a natural ecosystem, exactly. Now, this is obviously a very big name, and it's someone who is holding both a firm point of, like, nostalgia for a lot of people. I think there may be people who listen to this podcast who don't watch modern wrestling and they're like, JR, that's a name that they know. Yeah. And maybe there's people who have watched modern wrestling only and they know JR quite well also.
Yes.
How soon into you watching wrestling, Jo, did this name become kind of part of your knowing of the world of wrestling?
It was early. I'm pretty sure it was in the first year of me kind of learning about wrestling, like, since meeting you, basically, since actually understanding, like, names like The Undertaker and stuff. Like,
right, yeah.
If I think of my first proper entry point being that day you came to my house and showed me Hell in a Cell, that's like entry point 0.
Good God almighty.
Yeah.
Somebody stop the damn relationship. I will apologize in advance. There may be either far too many or far too few Jim Ross impressions in this episode, depending on your preferences. So sorry about that.
I think it was about a year after that moment, or within a year of that moment, that I became aware of Jim Ross.
Right, and it's interesting to me always that I think out of all the people we've done episodes on, I think there's a very select few, like a handful, where people who maybe have never seen wrestling at all will know of this person, kind of. Like, you know, well, Hulk Hogan is, I think, the prime example. You know, Steve Austin, maybe to a lesser extent, John Cena, obviously. You know, we haven't done an episode on The Rock, but he's a name that people know. But I think a lot of people are very familiar with Jim Ross, even if they don't know who he is.
I mean, maybe, I guess. I'm the wrong person to ask, because I was familiar, even though I wasn't familiar with wrestling, I was familiar with Hulk Hogan and Steve Austin and The Rock. But I had, never heard of or knowingly seen Jim Ross.
Right.
But his calls, I probably on some level, you know, if someone had done an impression of him, I would have been like, that's familiar, and I don't know why.
So when I was a teacher, I was blown away by this fact that you would have kids send in each other videos, Instagram videos and YouTube compilations. And it would be like, I'd be walking by, and I would always keep the ear out on the playground. If someone was talking about Randy Orton, I'd be like, excuse me, what's going on over here? And I would hear oftentimes, like, I think that's JR, what's on the playground? All these kids huddled around. And you'd be like, good God almighty, they killed him. All this stuff, like, don't do that. All these great calls. I'm like, is someone watching Hell in a Cell in here? And it'd be like a group of kids watching botches from soccer, from the footy, with JR's voice put over it. Or I'd look over here, and like another time there was kids, and they're all like, you'd hear people going like, what the hell is this? Have you got no soul? And they're watching fail compilations.
Yeah.
He is someone who, and I think it's important to address this at the start, he's kind of transcended wrestling a little bit.
Yeah, so that's actually, you saying that has reminded me that before I got into wrestling, back when I was just curious, wrestling curious, try to think of a catchy word for that, but there's I think there is one. But back when I was on Tumblr and I saw those GIFs of wrestlers that was like, oh, that looks fun. I remember there being a caption on one of them being like, WWE commentator voice, by God. And at the time being like, I know exactly what that sounds like.
Yeah.
But I didn't know, obviously it's transcended the point where like people don't necessarily know his name. But people, I think, if they do think WWE commentator voice, they do think Jim Ross.
And, there's people as well, I think it's always very funny to find this out, that there's people who think that, wrestling is WWE, as in, that those things are interchangeable.
Oh, God, yeah, like the time my American friend came over and we took him to a wrestling show.
Yeah.
Like
it was What Culture?
What Culture?
Yeah.
And then he went home and he told all his friends that we took him to see WWE, and we were like, no.
Oh, I love as well, there's a group of folks where, like, WrestleMania is the same, like, WWE is WrestleMania and WrestleMania is wrestling. I'm not saying that it's kind of like a WWE is. It's just those words all mean the same thing.
Yeah, no, honestly, if you'd asked me before we started this podcast, I would have said that, I'm sure.
And I think it's very worth mentioning that as that is the case, Jim Ross is easily, whether you like him or you don't like him, whatever your opinions, no one here is going to argue the point that he isn't the voice of wrestling for that very reason, because only one person has transcended wrestling into the mainstream as like the wrestling announcer voice, the WWE commentator voice.
Yeah.
And it's Jim Ross.
It's Jim Ross, yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I mean, I know why that is.
It's because he's like, is it because he's good at his job, or?
I mean, definitely he's good at, I'd say it's like, it's kind of part and parcel. Like, it's partly because he's good at his job, but I think mainly it's because he was so good at his job, he has done it for so long. Like, as someone pointed out to us on Twitter, he has been the voice of wrestling for 3 generations.
Yeah.
Like, in wrestling, you don't really get 3 generations of anyone.
No, you get 3 generations of different people from like the same family, maybe, or whatever.
But never, like, one person. Like, even someone like Ric Flair, who's had such a tenured career, you wouldn't really say, oh yeah, he's gone through 3 generations of being a wrestler, because he's kind of like come and gone and stuff like that. But
or like people shift into different roles.
Exactly.
Like say Dusty Rhodes or someone like that. But
they move
JR's
into booking or commentary. But JR's always been commentary. Yeah,
it's weird to think that you could have like kind of a 10-year-old kid and their granddad, and they can both be like kind of, oh yeah, I listen to this guy every week. Like, and I just think it's, when we're talking here now about this guy, we're talking about one of the most tenured professionals in wrestling.
Yeah, seriously.
Probably the most tenured non-wrestler in wrestling. I mean, this man has outlasted Vince McMahon in the world of wrestling.
You know what? Let's take a second to appreciate that fact.
That's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So he is someone who is associated in my mind as being that voice of wrestling. I think a big part of this is because almost every iconic moment I can think of when I was a kid, when I think in my mind of like Stone Cold doing something cool, or like Mankind winning the world title, or even thinking about kind of classic stuff from before my time, like Ric Flair and Sting, and it's Jim Ross and different types of Jim Ross, but that's the voice that I hear in my head.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if that's the case for all fans or for younger fans.
I mean, it's definitely the case for me, and I didn't grow up with him. Like, to the point where if I think back on like recent matches that he didn't call for, in my mind, I still hear him calling them.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like overwritten whoever actually did that job.
Now, I know we did a whole episode about commentary here on this very podcast, and it's an episode I think we're pretty proud of, because I think I took commentary for granted, like it's the most like just normal, take it in. There's wrestling commentators, they're gonna talk, and I'm gonna enjoy it. But you've always had a slightly different relationship with wrestling commentators and wrestling commentary as a platform or an art form, I guess. Your tastes have changed over the years, is that fair to say?
What, on commentary?
I mean, there was a point in time where you said that Vince McMahon was your favourite commentator. I'm not sure if that's the case anymore still.
No, not anymore. But he will always have a very special place in my heart as a commentator.
As a commentator.
Specifically. And it's just because of his silly voice and the type of stuff he talks about. Like, I feel... And I completely understand why other people don't like his style.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of for people like me. It's for people who... like sports entertainment.
Yeah, right.
Kind of dummies. And that's fine. But it's not very detailed or like clever, the stuff Vince McMahon says on commentary. Like, it's not going to be very quotable.
Yeah.
But it's simple to understand. You're not going to like, you understand what's going to happen in the match, and it's never too distracting, which I like. I appreciate that fact. But no, definitely my favourite commentators today are definitely Michael Cole and Taz.
Really?
Yeah.
Amazing. The good work been done over on Pay-Per-View Classic on the Patreon right there. Like, it was very, very funny that like you've been a slow build towards liking Taz, and all it took was seeing him as a commentator and not as an actual wrestler. I was very fortunate enough to meet Jim Ross at like kind of a live event that he did in London many, many moons ago. I think maybe even pre-podcast it would have been. But me and Adam Bibelow from the HR podcast, we went to see him, and we were gushing as we were such big fans of his from back in the day. And we're like, "Oh, Jim, thank you so much. Like thank you, for everything that you've done and all that." And he just looked at us and he went, "Us announcers, the wrestling's the music, but we just provide the lyrics."
Wow, that's deep.
And like I've heard him say that. It's probably his boilerplate stock phrase.
Said that
he
to
says
every person in that queue.
Yeah, because it was late and he was fucking sweating, he was tired, and he signed every fucking piece of merchandise that was put in front of him. I've always had that in my head as being like, that's such a beautiful way of describing that job, that role of what they do. You can't have one without the other. Yeah. And one can definitely elevate the other thing in ways.
Absolutely, yeah.
I really appreciate someone who thinks that way.
I mean, definitely when you compare it to commentary from other sports. Now, I know you're not much of a sports fan. Neither am I. But we've both seen sports. We're aware of like football commentary or rugby commentary or cricket commentary or whatever.
Yeah.
And it is interesting how commentary serves such a different purpose, even though there's a lot of crossover between shoot sports commentators and wrestling commentators.
I think there's a school of thought with a lot of people where wrestling should be treated like a sport. Yeah. And therefore, sports presentation is something that people like to see. And I know in AEW had things, like rankings and stuff like that, which they quietly got rid of in recent years. They did, like, it's because it was, a bit confusing maybe or hard to book long term. But, a big part of the sports presentation for people is kind of like they want the backstage interviewers to do it like that, the video packages to be like that, and they want the announcers to be like that. Yeah. And I always think it's very interesting because there's another school of thought, the Vince McMahon school of thought, which is commentators are storytellers. Yeah. And you shouldn't be telling me about moves. You shouldn't be telling me about sports stats. You should be telling me about the emotions, what's happening in the ring. Explain it to me, make me feel stuff as an audience member. And I can't think of someone who exists in both of those spaces at the same time as a commentator quite as well as Jim Ross has over his career.
Absolutely, yeah, I completely agree.
Now, Jim has had a very, very long and interesting career. I mean, were you shocked to find out that he wasn't just a commentator, that he's been kind of an office guy as well throughout his time?
No, see, this is, again, it's an interesting one to do an episode on at this point in the podcast, because Jim Ross, because he's such a important part of professional wrestling, it's been impossible for me to avoid learning about him. Like, I do try. We've been doing this podcast for 7 or 8 years. And throughout that time, I do try and not learn about certain people in wrestling.
But certain people just have a habit of coming up, don't they?
You can't stop it. And Jim Ross, unlike The Undertaker, who I know about 9 lives or whatever that's called. But
9 lives?
Is that not what it is?
It's 9 line, but that's like,
what?
I mean...
That makes less sense. I thought it was to do with a cat.
The thing to say that what you know about The Undertaker is a right-wing t-shirt he wore one time. I mean, we did have him versus Shawn Michaels in our last episode, in fairness.
Yeah, obviously I've seen him wrestle, but I'm not going, I haven't had to learn about much about him
in
his prime, about his personal life, about his career, stuff like that. Like, yeah, I've seen him, but compared to someone like Jim Ross, who I feel like I have inadvertently learned so much about him without even while trying not to.
Yeah, I mean, he's showed up in a lot of episodes as kind of, as someone who is, not in the commentary capacity, I think, and he's shown up a lot. We've talked about, it's been hiring practices and stuff like that from when he worked as the head of talent relations for WWE, which is a very, very hard job, let's just say.
Yeah, and because of that role, and because of the fact that, the nature of the podcast is we cover episodes on individual wrestlers, it has been unavoidable to talk about Jim Ross because he's been so important to, like, when we did Stone Cold, right at the very beginning of this podcast, he was one of those main key players. Like, he got Stone Cold hired. Yeah. He was part of Stone Cold storylines for a lot of the time. Like
Mick Foley's episode, he came up as well,
It's just unavoidable.
Yeah. I think, like, it is he's someone who has had a position of hiring and firing during one of the most kind of, tumultuous times. He would have been head of talent relations during, the Attitude Era, for instance.
Yeah.
A lot of people's favorite wrestlers, he would have signed Edge when he was a youngster, for instance, as kind of a young rookie or whatever. He would have been involved in the signing of, Kurt Angle, Trish Stratus, Lita, all these kind of big names. So he is someone who he has, again, he exists in two spaces at once in another sense, in that, iconic voice and, the voice you heard introducing lots of shows over the years, but also responsible, without Jim Ross, the hiring of WWE and, even WCW, it wouldn't have been the same. Like, the landscape of wrestling is the way it is, because of him in no small part.
Yeah.
So we are talking about someone now who is... it's funny, like, I know how important he is, but I'm kind of like, it feels like it's dawning on me, like, shit, he is, like, insanely important.
Oh, yeah, he's like as important as, like, Vince McMahon.
Yeah, I think, you can make arguments for that, for sure,
Which is, like, both impressive and somehow insulting at the same time.
Well, I mean, like, Jim Ross, we're gonna talk, through his career. We're gonna talk about, the highs and the many lows. We're gonna talk about some of the matches that he's called. We'll pick up on some of, like, his style points and stuff along the way. And we will get into, as well, some of the many times that he's been used as an on-screen character. But I'll tell you, like, for me as a kid, as soon as I heard Jim Ross, and as soon as I saw Jim Ross, that was, like, something that I was into. Like, it hooked me as a kid straight away.
Why is that?
Honestly, and I hate this about myself, it's that, like, it was because he was a bit of a character. Vince McMahon viewed Jim Ross as being a bit of a character.
Yeah.
And, I tuned in to watch the wrestling show, and there's a dude in a cowboy hat called JR, and he'd been, ma'am, welcome to the wrestling show.
So,
like,
by a bit of a character, you mean he wore a hat?
Well, he wore a hat, but, like, he had, this fucking cool southern drawl. He had passion. He got angry about the bad guys. He fucking got, he hated injustice. He wanted to see a good fight. He loved a good fight. He loved a slobber knocker.
Yeah.
But, case in point, when I got my first wrestling video game, and WrestleMania 2000 at the N64, that was mine and mine alone, and like I put me versus Jim Ross straight away, like. Yeah, I want to fight JR. There was a mark of respect there. We had to look at some of pictures of young JR. Not born but raised in Oklahoma.
So cute.
You said he looked like
He looks exactly... I'll post it on Twitter. He looks exactly like Bobby Hill.
Bobby Hill.
Literally. It's like Mike Judge when he was designing the Hill family. It was like, now what would little Bobby Hill look like? I know. Quickly goes to Google. Young Jim Ross as a child.
Got the little buzz cut.
It looks exactly so
cute as a button.
Cute as a button. Yeah, but like also a little bit of like... defiance.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't look like just a little well-behaved boy. He looks like he's got a little bit of spark in him.
A bit of spark. See, this is really interesting that you made the Bobby Hill comparison. His childhood, it's you kind of take for granted, like kind of, it's back in the old days or whatever it is. But like, JR is like, 70 or whatever it is now. So when he grew up, a different world, a different time, you know. And he grew up on a farm in Oklahoma, and he was an only child.
Oh, really?
One of those latchkey kids, as they used to refer to them. So his mum and dad would be working, all time, all the day. And he mentioned in his book that there'd be times where he'd just be left on the farm alone for like, hours, sometimes days. And, he kind of lived in his imagination a little bit.
Yeah.
It's why he was drawn to wrestling early on. He would be calling matches in his head, playing with like, you know, little dolls he made out of sticks, you know, just kind of wandering around the farm. You know, it's always difficult. I always feel like really like a bit weird because I feel like will always come across as judgy about kind of like looking at how someone was brought up back in the day. But I feel like how he was brought up, we've used the phrase toxic masculinity back in this podcast a few times, and I feel it's kind of a prime example of that. You know, like his dad is the archetypical strong silent type.
Oh right.
Dad never said he loved him.
Oh.
You know, that type of a thing.
Oh God.
Love was hard work. You know, no one ever drowned in their own sweat was a great phrase in the household. How do you earn your dad's appreciation? By working hard, you know, putting your head down.
I was going to say, because like you say about him having a big imagination and also him being an only child, I can only imagine, like being an only child is hard anyway because your parents will only ever pick on you to do chores. If you also work on a farm and you're the only child, that's so much extra work you have to do. No wonder he probably really appreciated the moments where he got to play with his little straw figurines.
And I think as well with that, like, you know, my parents, you know, I grew up in kind of you know, I wasn't an only child, but, you know, I was the type of kid where I didn't get to see my parents a lot when I was growing up. You know, my parents were working, you know, 9-10 o'clock at night during the week, so, you know, I wouldn't see them an awful lot. So I always felt like there's this kind of like, there's obviously a respect, but also kind of like a little bit of anxiety that comes with that when you're a kid and you know that your parents are working so hard and you're conscious of how long they're working and stuff like that. It's hard, you know, and I feel like that, you know, if you're an only child, it's even harder. And he has this kind of, you know, the two people that JR worshipped most of his life were John Wayne and his dad. And both of them are kind of like, you know, well, I'm going to saddle up anyway and bite my bottom lip. And there's a lot of sad stories in his book that kind of show this. Like, you know, his dad's, his prized possession was the dog. The dog in the house was like this, you know, premier dog, you know, had papers and everything. Once a year they would, you know, let the dog breed and, you know, they'd sell the puppies and they'd make, you know, a good bit of money from that. It was one of the big revenue streams for the farm. And one day JR, well, he forgot to lock the gate and that was one of his many chores he had to do. And he didn't lock the gate and some other dog came in and impregnated the prize dog.
Oh shit.
And it was one of those things where like he was like, I almost knew straight away what was going to happen. And, you know, a couple months later, there's a litter of puppies. And his dad shows up with a hammer and the puppy's in a bag.
Oh my fucking God.
And I'm not saying this is a 17 or 18-year-old kid at this point. This is like, he's like in short pants, let's just say. And it's like, it's almost like he doesn't have to say, it's like, you know what you did. Here's the consequence. I'm not mad at you, but you have to deal with it now.
Fucking hell.
I cannot imagine, like, when you talk about a stiff upper lip and all that jazz, I don't know what kind of like hard fucking armor you have to don mentally to be able to do that to fucking puppies.
But that's like such a common part of living on a farm, especially back then.
Oh yeah.
Because like, there's extra mouths to feed. You can't afford that.
And that's, I think, kind of just showing you kind of the expectations of like kind of, you know, gotta do what you gotta do. And I feel like he's someone who, you know, that's something I thought I'd bring up early because I feel like later on in his career, that mindset that he has where it's like, you gotta be tough, you gotta be strong, you gotta be brave.
Learn to like the taste of shit.
Yeah, and I feel like, you know, there's many paths in life where that can serve you incredibly well, and I think there's other paths in life where that kind of mentality can lead you to, I won't say be taken advantage of, but like, man, there's nothing like an easy target for a bully than someone who, you know, has this complex that they gotta be fucking tough, gotta live up to those expectations. And I have to say that Vince McMahon preys on those people, you know, in all walks of life. And this is going to be an example of an episode where Vince McMahon has kind of a toxic relationship with someone and they're not a wrestler. Yeah. You know? And I think that is very worth bearing in mind. He was a bit of a hunk in high school, though.
Oh my God. Well, you say high school, as if it was just in high school. I mean, he's a hunk throughout his career. My personal opinion.
Official hunk ranking by Joe Graham right there, folks.
Prime hunk. But yeah, as a young footballer, total Chad.
I was blown away. I just assumed, you know, I was reading the book and it's like, you know, he liked to watch the matches, he liked to listen to the football on the radio, and he was, you know, hanging around the farm. So I'm thinking like, you're a nerd like me, right? And it's like, no, fucking captain of the football team.
Yeah.
He's the class president in high school.
Yeah.
The leader of the future farmers of America.
Wow.
Like, what the heck? Like, this is, and that, in Oklahoma, that's a big ass deal.
Of course it is.
You
Yeah,
know?
he's a high achiever.
You know, he's the son of a prominent farmer. He is like the next generation of farmers. He's like their kind of, you know, their spokesperson. To say that it was a disappointment to the family when he's like, I'm going to give this wrestling thing a whirl.
Ooh.
Like, I almost imagine it's as difficult when I was telling my parents I'm going to do podcasting.
Yeah,
like,
I know,
it's like,
right?
you do what? Like, seriously?
What's that?
That's a very strange thing. So the way he got into wrestling, this is like classic, because, you know, back in the day when you had to protect the business and people didn't know if it was fake or work, he wanted to raise money for his fraternity in college because they had been involved in a bit of a fracas, Joe.
Oh, I never like to hear that. Fraternity and fracas.
Yeah, those are two bad F words. So he described it in his book as thus, where there was two football teams, and one of the football teams had a lot of black students on it, and the other football team was mostly white students.
Okay.
And they had developed a quote-unquote healthy rivalry, which led to, let's just say, when they did have a football match, there was, like, you know, a bit of chaos, let's just say.
Right.
You know, dressing rooms were fucked up, you know, brawl, this, that, and the other, you know.
Wow, okay.
Double check with Kevin before we edit this, just so I'm sure I haven't got my story mixed up. But essentially, the fraternity were with all his football team were all called in. Basically, it's like, right, like, you know, you've pretty much disgraced the school here. We've had a big incident. You know, everyone's breathing down your necks. You need to do something positive for the college. So JR is thinking, like, right, we're going to raise some money maybe for charity, put on some sort of an event. What will we do? And he was thinking, what could work? He's like, I know, wrestling. People love wrestling. We've got a space here in the school. We can pay them through the fund from the fraternity that we get. This is a great idea. So he goes to one of the local wrestling shows where he meets Cowboy Bill Watts, who is a man who would be his mentor. And he basically has to negotiate getting a wrestling show while under the veil of kayfabe.
So does Jim at this point know that wrestling is, inverted commas, fake?
I mean, he does, but he knows enough, though, like a real smart fan, that he knows enough that he shouldn't say anything.
That's so fascinating, because the number of times on this podcast we have mentioned wrestlers having no idea.
And they're in the ring, like,
and
you
they're
know,
in the ring. And some cases, like with Brett, they're in a family of wrestlers and they don't even know.
Having a clue. So the fact that he could figure that out really says, like, more than him joining all these societies and being class president, that to me says way more about his intelligence than any of those. There's a kind of a social intelligence there and a way to read the room that you know, will serve you well in this. You know, there's a reason why he climbed to the top of the office side of wrestling, and it's like that type of a mindset.
He gets it.
I mean, he tells a story where, like, you know, when he first meets Bill Watts, it's like, yeah, we'll come meet you after the matches. And, you know, Bill's in the main event because he's the booker and he's also, you know, one of the top stars in the promotion. And, you know, afterwards he's coming in and he's like, oh, that son of a bitch, he just screwed me out of the title, you know, the big ice pack over his head. They're like, just give him a minute, guys, give him a minute. You know, like, oh yeah, of course, Bill, you know, whatever you need, Mr. Watts, you know, just playing along basically.
Yeah.
I just know these are all like tough men who view themselves very seriously, but we all know it's fake, but let's all pretend.
You have to protect the egos.
I know, right?
I love that.
So he gets, you know, a deal set up with him where it's like, all right, you know, we'll send you some wrestlers. We want this amount of money. You know, we'll give you the ring. We'll give you some, you know, referees, whatever it is. But you have to do the promotion. You have to do the ads, all that stuff. And Jim is like, great, because, you know, I'm involved in the radio station here. We'll put out radio ads. And, like, no one was doing radio ads at the time for wrestling.
Wow.
So straight away, Jim Ross is like, he's the whiz kid, because they got a great show. He books this show, basically. He promotes this show on campus, and he gets a great big crowd.
So what year would this have been? Kind of
70s, you know, thereabouts.
Wow. And they didn't have radio advertising in the 70s for wrestling.
Didn't think about doing it, like.
What?
But this is about back in the day where, like, hey, I'm Bill Watts, I'm the promoter, I'm the booker, I'm one of the top stars as well, you know, and I also have to work for the NWA, and, you know, working, you know, they have a lot going on, I guess.
I guess so.
And it's this great thing where, you know, because it's wrestling, no one could be like, hey, you did a great thing. We want you to do great things for us. It's more like, oh, well, you know, maybe there's an opportunity for someone like you.
Do you a favor.
Maybe we'll do you a favor and let you come in here and do something. Was it radio adverts? I think whatever. That'll never work.
Sounds like a phase.
You know, this is terrible, but we'll bring you in. And he's brought in as kind of a catch-all term, let's just say. Like, he can do, he's a referee, but he's also a driver, and he's also Leroy McGurk's assistant.
Right.
Leroy McGurk, bit of a character. He popped up in Jim Ross's Hall of Fame speech. He was a totally blind man. What did you know about Leroy McGurk?
I know that he's blind. I know that he's terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, if you only know of him from the anecdotes there.
Which I do. I only know that.
What's the anecdote that you know about Leroy McGurk?
Oh my God. So, Jim Ross said that he got called up by Leroy McGurk, and Leroy was like, come meet me in my car. And so Jim goes to his car, and when he gets in, he sees a revolver or something?
Yeah.
Some kind of gun on the dashboard. And JR's like, well, what's that doing there then? And Leroy McGurk is like, we're going to go kill the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. We're going to murder him. I'm going to shoot him. And
I mean, like, that's got to be like the sassiest, like, first day on the job request I've ever heard. Like, look, I know you're new here, but you got to earn your stripes.
Yeah.
You know, and we all have to lump it.
But, like, what I find, like, unfathomable about that is the guy is blind.
Yeah.
Completely blind.
Oh, yeah.
Like, how are you going to shoot someone? Like, strangle them, maybe. Why that requires aiming?
Well, the idea was that he said, right, what you're going to do, Jim, is, right, you're going to get me into, we're going to check into the hotel, right? You sit me in a chair right by the door, put the gun in my hand.
Point it for me.
Point it up there. Then you go and you call Ted DiBiase. You tell that son of a bitch to come down here. I need to talk business with him. And then we'll, like, 3 knocks on the door so I know it's you, and then open it, get out of the way, and then I'm going to unload the revolver, and I'll kill Ted DiBiase.
Such a bad idea.
I mean, yeah, usually if you're like, Leroy McGurk won national championships with a glass eye. Like, he was a proper old school shooter, like a Stu Hart type.
Right.
So you weren't going to tell him he wasn't going to murder someone if he wanted to.
Oh yeah, obviously. You let the man murder whoever he wants.
He was someone who was blind but refused to use a cane.
Right.
He was like, he didn't kind of fully accept his condition, so he's like, yeah, if I want to shoot someone, and nothing's going to stop me, like.
We could have lived in a world where Jim Ross got shot by his own promoter boss.
Or we could live in a world where Jim Ross is in prison because he was an accessory to a murder of the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase.
Oh my God, why did he even want to kill him?
I've heard various things. It was either like he didn't like that he was taking a booking somewhere else, or it was like
petty.
he was like looking at his daughter. It was some proper stupid like. I guess if there's a good reason to murder Ted DiBiase and like one of your top stars or whatever it is. So your Jim is like.
So wait, it was his own employee.
Oh yeah, he was working. He was one of the guys who was wrestling for him. What?
Just fire him. Don't murder the man.
Yeah, you want to hear tales from the territories? There's one for you
God.
right there. A different world. You know. And I think, we had it in the Brett episode as well.
Oh, we say different world. I mean, Tony Khan, he's always getting wrestlers to drive in places so he can murder someone who works for him.
Fucking hell, actually. I got a call from Tony Khan. He said, we're going to go murder CM Punk.
Yeah.
Just give me 3 knocks on the door, make sure it's him. Leroy McGurk, interesting character, would drink a full bottle of whiskey every day.
Right.
And he would do commentary as well. And that's how, Jim got his break into commentary, was that... the regular commentator was gone. It was clear that Jim was the guy that they wanted.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, maybe we'll give you a shot,
right.
Maybe. But, his first run on commentary, his colleague was blind.
Mm.
So, and we talked, in the How To Commentary episode, the need for good commentary for accessibility reasons.
Absolutely. Yeah, I find it fascinating, the idea that someone could do commentary while not being able to see anything.
So the idea is he'd be the kind of the color because he's the former wrestling champion. So Jim would be like, here's the move, here's what's happening in the ring, here's what he's going into now. And he'd be like, oh, okay, you described me.
On that.
Yeah, he can only commentate if the play-by-play is doing his job really well.
You know what? I would love to watch some of those matches if they're out there, because that sounds really interesting. And honestly, that kind of sounds like the pure essence of what commentary should be.
Yeah, and
I'm not saying all commentators need to be, there needs to be one blind commentator for every table.
No, but when we were doing that episode, you listened to a few pieces of commentary and where you couldn't see the match at all.
Yeah, I was just relying on the play-by-play and the color commentary for information.
And if I recall correctly, Jim Ross was the person who excelled most at that.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
I mean, it came from as well his dad. His dad loved football, and Jim loved football as well. So that was like their bonding thing. So they would spend hours and hours of him just you know, they'd watch the football and Jim would just literally sit there as a kid and just do play-by-play for his dad.
Oh.
And then his dad would be like, well, why did he do that? You know, and he'd be like, he'd try and analyze and all that. So he was kind of from a young age being geared up for this.
Cool.
It's amazing, like, you know, and that's kind of the background, I guess, that you need there. But, you know, he's traveling the roads. He's, you know, the young boy or whatever. He's driving people around. You know, he's sleeping on the floor. I think it was so cute hearing him in his Hall of Fame speech being like, you know, Skandor Akbar would let me, like, you know, get one of the big pillows and curl up at the end of his bed.
Yeah.
That's so sweet and so cute.
And he wasn't saying it in a kind of like, that's what's so fascinating about wrestling is so oftentimes wrestlers will tell these stories about them like sleeping on a floor and they'll be like, and it was the best time of my life. And Jim Ross is the same. He's like, I loved every second. Loved it.
I admire that. Like,
me too. Couldn't
be
me.
Fucking hard, you know, real hard living.
You got to really love your job to do that.
So he kind of just, by being around there, by being willing to do kind of a bit of everything, he kind of proved himself to be invaluable. Because if you're kind of a jack of all trades and you're willing to do everything, then hey, you know, there's going to be a space for you in a promotion like it was Mid-South where he was. And like Mid-South Wrestling that Bill Watts ran, it was considered to be the cutting edge at the time. Because they had a TV show, and they were like the first people ever where like an hour of wrestling would end, and like someone had just run in and screwed someone over, and there's a big crazy brawl happening, and you know you'd end the show by going, "Oh my god, what the hell's going to happen next?" And that's it. The episode's over. Tune in next week.
Wow.
You know, a lot of wrestling companies don't even do that anymore.
No.
You know, so he was kind of a little bit on the cutting edge there with that. But the territory went into decline because its main base was around the oil fields in Oklahoma and Texas. So there was a lot of people there, like laborers who were coming in to work on the oil fields. When the oil fields got shut down, suddenly there was no audience.
Right.
So it started to struggle.
Yeah.
At one point they thought they'd try and become like a new brand. They turned into the UWF, but it didn't have legs, unfortunately. So they ended up being bought out by Crockett Promotions, which is the group that would then become WCW, basically, in essence.
Right.
And it's kind of a bit shady because JR had gotten to the point in the office at that point where if there was going to be a big takeover, he was in line for a big payday. And classic wrestling, the money never materialized.
Right.
You know, UWF got brought in and kind of, it was meant to be like kind of a merger, but it was kind of like, you know, Ring of Honor and AEW right now. It was kind of like, we got this property, we're not really sure what to do with it. And in this case, it just disappeared after a while. So he ends up then working in Crockett as one of their lead announcers. And this was, I thought, a good time to maybe pop in and watch some classic Jim Ross commentary. We went back to the heady days of 1989. And you ain't going to get much better than Ric Flair and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. I was, not going to lie, this was a fun day at the office to watch some classic Jim Ross commentary.
Yeah, I'm excited to see more Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat.
I think it's one of those combinations that's like, it's like garlic and parsley. It's always guaranteed to go over with the crowd, like, you know? Younger Jim Ross on commentary is a much different vibe from kind of main timeline, you know, Attitude Era Jim Ross, which is a different vibe from more recent AEW Jim Ross.
Yeah, definitely.
The younger JR, what is it about him? That's there's an intangible quality there, I think.
I mean, he's definitely really good. Don't get me wrong. He's always obviously been gifted for commentary. And he sounds so young here.
I know, right?
But like,
it's a higher pitch,
it's
almost.
so high pitched. It sounds
like it's this real like.
It sounds like edited, like modulated or something.
Yes.
Like tonally pitched up.
Yeah.
Like it's bizarre. Honestly, I found it quite jarring.
Yeah, I remember like watching early Jim Ross stuff for the first time, and I couldn't believe it was the same person, you know. And obviously there's reasons, medical reasons why, you know, his voice and his ability to speak changed over the years.
Yeah, I mean, voices do change as well.
That's true, yeah.
Like, I mean, if you listen back to our podcast, our voices all change.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot of documentation of that over the years.
And we started in our 20s. He started when he was basically 19.
Yeah, I know, right? But there is, I feel like there's a lot of things that he's done kind of throughout his career, but they're a lot more evident in the early days. And I feel like the tempo in which he speaks and how he goes from kind of not to passionate very quickly.
Yes.
And it never sounds phony.
Phony, no.
You know, as in, like, it always feels like it's a genuine type of a reaction or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I feel like I often watch wrestling and someone will be like, oh my, because it's like they know the big spot is coming, they've gotten up and gone out of the way. Whereas Jim, like a big part of what he would do, he'd be like, don't tell me the finish.
Oh, really?
Don't tell me the finish. Don't tell me the big spots.
Yeah.
He'd like to know as little as possible.
That's great.
So he could react organically.
Now, I wonder if that's still the way he works today.
Then let's not bury the good times by talking about the later days. Is all I'll say. I mean, all I'll say is yes, but the outcome is maybe not the same.
Right.
Here,
okay.
You know, I feel like maybe that leads to him being more bemused than not in modern days. Whereas here, it's like fucking hell. You know, you couldn't tell me from Jim Ross's point of view there wasn't anything more exciting or more real and more intense than Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat at the Chi-Town Rumble, you know?
I find it very impressive how quickly he talks here in his early career. Like, he could have definitely, if he wanted to, had an alternative path in being an auctioneer.
Yes.
Because he really can, he enunciates so well, even when he's speaking really fast.
Because I was going to say, you had often said, I remember the early days of watching wrestling, that you found a lot of the commentary, like, it was hard to, like, focus on the action of the ring and all the noises and the clattering that was going on and actually, like, listen to what they were saying and, you know,
yeah, I mean, I still have that. It turns out it's an ADHD thing.
How about that? It wasn't wrestling's fault after all. I guess when we were watching the few matches that we did here for Jim, I guess we were probably trying to keep an eye on the old or an ear on the old commentary.
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
He was speaking very fast. Did that like make it more difficult for you to understand him or anything like that?
Not for me. I've always found it very easy to. I think because I speak very quickly as well, and everyone in my family does. So I've never found speed has never been difficult for me to understand.
I've always been a fast talker as well.
Yeah.
I used to always get in trouble when I was speaking in any capacity to be told to slow down all the time.
That's why everyone who listens to this podcast, instead of listening to it on 1.5 speed, they listen to it on 0.5. Slow us down.
The intensity that he brings for near falls in particular is something that I love because, and I feel like it's the type of commentary where you hear him say and do something and then you kind of compare it to more modern stuff and it's like, it's not as if the modern stuff is particularly bad on its own, but when you hear someone doing it in a different way, it makes you kind of go, why don't they do it like that?
Yeah.
Like in the first 30 seconds of this match, someone gets pinned and Jim Ross is like, 1, 2, oh my God. Because like, yeah, it could.
It
right?
could end at any time.
As opposed to like, if you watch a more modern wrestling product, if someone goes for a pinfall in the first 10 seconds or first minute, no one's going to go, oh my God, because wrestling matches never end after a minute, generally speaking. You're not going to get excited. But Jim Ross is already like real life passion.
Yeah.
And that makes watching these matches, like I got so into this match.
Yeah, it makes it so much more exciting.
So good. Like, he never, ever feels like it's faked. You think that he genuinely believes it. And I think that comes from him treating it like a sport, I guess, in that sense.
Guess so.
And, in this match, you've got Ric Flair and you got Ricky Steamboat. They're obviously two great athletes and all that. But I like as well that he's not just calling moves and telling you, like, oh, this person might win very quickly or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
He starts peppering in these little character notes along the way.
Yeah, and it's really clever because I think part of the art of being good on commentary means knowing what to say and what not to say, because obviously you've got to call the moves, you've got to give information, stuff like that, but you also have to get over the characters in a way that would please the wrestler and the promoter.
Yes.
And so that means, especially at this period in history, keeping kayfabe and adding to that kayfabe.
Yeah.
And there was a moment in this match where he starts talking about the differences between Ricky Steamboat and Ric Flair.
Oh, and let me tell you, this man has a sixth sense for downtime. It's like he knows there's going to be 30 seconds here and I can fill this in with little nuggets.
Snippet. And he starts to talk about how Ric Flair went to private school. He doesn't say it in like a judgmental way or like, look at that rich kid. He's just like, yeah, he went to private school.
He also got kicked out of private school.
But yeah, he had a very privileged education, privileged upbringing. On the other hand, Ricky Steamboat, he went to public school. He didn't have the same opportunities. He doesn't need to hammer home what that means.
Yes.
He just says it. Those are the facts. And then he allows the audience to come to their own conclusions about what that means for them.
Yeah, there's another bit as well he said along those lines later on where he's like, Ric Flair is kind of, is white collar. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, when this match is over, folks, he's heading back to North Carolina, working at the family business, Steamboat Gym. And like that's a real place. And it's like, well, yeah, it's like, there's one hand you can be like, here's a millionaire wrestler who's got so much money, he's got like a side hustle. But instead he's reframed it as like, that's the business. He's off there grafting, working in the gym. He's just a regular guy, like, and he doesn't have to say he's just like you and me, but he's like he's making that very much evident very quickly. I think there's a lost art there in the commentators being able to fill in the blanks that the wrestlers maybe don't have a chance to on the microphone or whatever it is. And he's apparently someone who would sit down with wrestlers and be like, tell me about your character.
That's so good. Why doesn't everyone do... I mean, I guess you can't do that with everyone. There's not time in the world. Wrestlers are very busy people and they probably don't want to sit down with every single commentator and tell them their life story. But like, that extra bit of research is essential to be a good commentator.
Oh yeah, I think it's... And I know you mentioned Taz and Cole as the commentators that you like, but like, you could set your watch to it back in the day where Taz would be like, yeah, you know, I had a conversation in the back earlier with this person and anecdote, you know. Whereas Jim will just he'll pepper it in a little bit. And I think as well, there's in these early ones particularly, there's a poetry to his language.
Oh my God, totally.
You know, there's a thing he says about Ric Flair here when Rick just,
I don't know if this might be the same one I've got.
Was it a marvelous documentation of tenacity is the nature boy Ric Flair. Beautiful.
Now the one I've got is different. Ric Flair travels in fast circles.
I love that.
Which, like, works on several levels.
Yeah.
Because one, he, like, circles the ring, and he does it quite fast, and he'll fall over and stuff like that. But what he actually meant here is that he travels with very flashy people.
Yeah.
He's a high flyer, he's very flashy, he throws his money around, he has these sexy ladies who accompany him to the ring. He travels in fast circles. I just think that's a wonderful phrase.
Yeah.
I've never heard that said before, and I think that's a really lovely way to say it.
I mean, I got goosebumps during this match, and I was like, I just dropped. I was kind of parachuted in. I wasn't watching loads of Ric Flair. I wasn't watching this. I wasn't following the angle or the show, or it's not even a particular time period that I'm invested in.
Yeah.
But I was straight away there. And I think that the big thing about his commentary is that it's almost always very positive. In terms of he's always bigging up the guys and he's bigging up the brand. Like in this match, he's talking about the NWA. This is the biggest title fight. This is the biggest prize. He's not saying, it's not being like, oh, it's over this other banana nose circus company, brother. He's just talking about, we're here and this place is great. These guys are great. This is exciting. Like, and it's infectious.
Yeah.
His passion is incredibly contagious.
Oh yeah, definitely.
He's fucking anguished when Ric Flair uses the ropes for a pin illegally, and then he stays there for kick out after kick out. It made us both realize oh yeah, kicking out is really fucking hard, and like putting your feet on the ropes, maybe that makes it a little bit worse.
It just made me think about I wonder how long Ric Flair could plank for. I watched the world record for longest plank the other day.
Oh wow,
it's like 4 or 6 hours.
What?
It's ridiculous.
Wow.
But yeah, I bet Ric Flair in his prime could have done a few hours.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, get a couple of screwdrivers in him, get him up at 2 a.m, he'd be there with the best of them. Couple more beautiful quotes, and we're getting into like the final stretches of the match, and the crowd are like all on their feet, they're at a fever pitch. And when Ricky the Dragon is just about, it feels like he's about to get it, he screams, "This man, he's fighting for every working class family in America." And then he gets to the top rope, the Dragon, will he fly tonight? Fuck me, man. I'm getting goosebumps all over again. Like,
Aww.
And like when the referee gets whacked, he goes from like passion, energy to be like, oh no, he just drops it all. Like, all your groceries have fallen out of your bag. Oh no, no, not like this. And we go from the figure 4 leg lock. We think that's it. It's over. And then he gets turned over into a small package. And Jim Ross is like, can he hold him? Can he? Yes. And the match is over. What a beautiful crescendo that he added. Like, this match, I am convinced, because it's not a move match. It's Rick and Ricky Steamboat. Like, they're doing their chops and their arm drags and stuff. But it's like, you could watch this without commentary and kind of be like, oh yeah, it's the same kind of 4 or 5 things on a nice loop and it ties up in a bow. But this man made this a story, a complex, layered story.
He just ties it all together in such a neat way.
Yeah.
He just puts a ribbon on it.
Well, people say, oh, they're telling a story with their bodies in the ring. They are, but he's telling that story as well.
Yeah, he's the narrator. He's piecing it all together for you.
I'd argue, I'll say that when you're there live and watching wrestling live, it's a completely different vibe.
Yeah,
you can see that story obviously a lot more clearly when you're seeing them right in front of you. But in terms of watching a broadcast, I'd hazard to say you can't tell that story without without that commentary, or you can't tell as good a story, I guess, is my thought on that. So he finds himself climbing up the ladder in old Crockett, now WCW as well. He actually becomes the head of broadcasting at one point, and finds himself butting heads with a young announcer who's just come in. Oh, that
slithering in.
That no good weatherman. It's Minnesota's most preeminent meat salesman, young Eric Bischoff, and Jim Ross apparently don't get along.
Well, there's a surprise.
Why do you think they don't get along?
Because they are totally different people who want different things. I cannot think of two. Maybe Vince Russo and Jim Ross would be more polar opposite.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I get that.
But Eric Bischoff does not care for wrestling in the way that Jim Ross does.
JR has always been a little bit sensitive, and I guess rightly so, because wrestling is a very cosmetic business, and it's rightly or wrongly, that's what it is. And I think that he always felt that he was the guy who could give you the best play-by-play, the best announcing, but my job is at risk because here comes this pretty boy that they want in. He looks good on television. The thought of
Eric Bischoff being a threat to Jim Ross is bizarre.
But I mean, he was the executives liked him. The Turner guys like, look at this young fucking stud.
God, all
I got a 6-pack of lamb chops for him last week, and they were delicious.
Takes more to be good on commentary than a dazzling smile.
I know, but I think I think I've learned this over the years that your own kind of insecurities about something can give a bit of power to someone else. I think the young pretty boy coming to take your job, that's only really a thing because people can tell that you're threatened by this young pretty boy coming in, and you have made it seem like he's going to come and get your job. You kind of make that a bit more real by expressing that, I guess, or people be able to tell that about you. But yeah, he soon finds his way out of the WCW because when Eric Bischoff is made the executive producer, Jim just resigns because he thinks that he's going to be buried or he's going to be, thrown under the bus or whatever it is. And he makes his way over to the big time, the big leagues. WrestleMania 9 sees the debut of Jim Ross in the WWF, now WWE.
I'm obsessed with this WrestleMania.
Yeah, we got to do this for Pay-Per-View Classic soon,
Check out our Instagram for a great picture of Jim Ross in his toga.
You like the toga?
I love the toga. I love seeing everyone in their togas. You got him, you got Howard Finkel, you just all these random kind of
part of the broadcast team.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you just get to see them in these wonderful outfits. And it's just, you never get that anymore. I love it, I love it, I love it.
Talk about being thrown into the deep end of if there ever was more a palpable difference between classic WCW, from the early 90s and Vince McMahon's cartoon show. It's hey, you're going to show up on the first day of the job, you have to wear a toga, and your broadcast colleague is Macho Man Randy Savage, which Jim said was one of the hardest people he ever had to work with. I'm not surprised. Hard. And you got Bobby Heenan there as well, who he wants to make fun of the new guy, Heenan apparently was trying to convince him to go commando in the toga. And he's like, we're all doing it, Jim.
He just is his character so much.
I know, right?
Wow, what an arsehole.
It's a decent enough start for him. It feels like he is going to be
WrestleMania 9.
Yeah, I mean,
that's a big deal.
Top guy, he's the main play-by-play.
Yeah.
And Vince McMahon has kind of stepped to one side at this point because there's impending investigations, let's just say, are coming up. Or, Vince McMahon is, thinking that maybe he doesn't want to be the main announcer anymore. And you're following the footsteps of Gorilla Monsoon and stuff like that.
Big shoes to fill.
Big shoes to fill, yeah. He was going to become the voice of the biggest wrestling company in the world.
Yeah.
And it doesn't last very long, unfortunately. He does, be the main announcer for a couple of pay-per-views. He does find himself butting heads a little bit with some of the uppers, the people in the upper management of WWE, particularly Vince McMahon, who thinks that he sounds too Southern.
That's such an internalized hatred of his own origins.
Yes, because I always forget this about him. That he's from
Southern America.
Yeah, he's from North Carolina, which makes him, my new favorite word, a Tarhelian.
A Tarhelian?
A Tarhelian.
That sounds like a Star Trek word.
It doesn't. It's not. If you're from North Kakalaki, you're a Tarhelian, my friend.
Wow.
So Vince McMahon, growing up in the trailer down south.
Yeah, and he's very snooty about that stuff as well.
So snooty.
As much as he would never ever admit it.
You can read him like a fucking book,
I
like
know.
as if there was any mystery to this man all
Yeah.
along. Like, wait, the man who's from the South and then went to live with his dad in the big city in New York
Yeah.
and hates the South because of his abusive stepfather and the bad times he had down there. Wow, guess what? He's internalized that and he hates all Southern people now,
Yeah.
or doesn't hate them, but just kind of. He looks down his nose a bit.
He does, yeah. He thinks it's like, yeah. And you know what? It's still an issue in America today with certain accents being seen as like not good enough.
Yeah, and that happens. I mean, I'm shocked, like in this here in the UK, the extent to which that's the case.
It's
like
terrible here.
I mean, in Ireland, I know there's lots of different accents and all that, but there is kind of I felt like across Ireland there was an understanding of like, oh yes, that accent, that's from there, and that's why they speak like that. But like, you can drive 20 miles here in the UK and someone from one town would be like, excuse me, what? Like, excuse me, you're from Leicester City. Well, I'm from Nottingham and I don't understand a word you're saying. I find it very, very peculiar, kind of this.
I can't explain it. It's an English thing.
It's an English thing.
It's just weird. We like that.
And an American thing as well, I guess, to an extent.
Yeah, it's real sad. But yeah, for me, Jim Ross's accent is like, it's like part of the best things about him. Like, I love his accent. It's so... It brings an air of authenticity. I think especially because wrestling as an art form, as an industry, has so much Southern roots.
Well, that's it. And like for me, I remember thinking wrestling was this big American thing, and when I would tune in, watch wrestling, and then all of a sudden there's a dude in a cowboy hat talking this cool Southern drawl. I was like, fuck yeah, America. I mean, my later teen years is when I was obsessed with Japan. My early teen years was like, America, wow!
Yeah.
And then George Bush ruined it for us all. Boo! Now, another important thing happens for Jim around this time. He is taking a flight and he happens to meet his wife, who is a air hostess at the time.
Oh, you say happens to meet his wife like he wasn't introduced to her by Ric Flair.
I know. And like, this is like such a weird ass story. Because Rick is basically like doing it thinking that like, well, she's obviously going to want to be with me, a married man.
Yeah.
Like,
Obviously, by the way, a sore point throughout his life.
Yes.
That she didn't pick Ric Flair over Jim Ross.
If I could only get that kiss from that other man's wife.
He only wants her because he can't have her.
Pretty much,
Literally the only reason.
Rick, the grass is always greener, Flair. But yeah, I mean, I don't know like a non-mean way to say this. But the way that Jim Ross, because I used to read Jim Ross's blog all the time, I listened to his podcast. I was a prolific consumer of Jim Ross's stuff over the years.
Yeah.
And anytime he would talk about his wife Jan, he talked about it in the same vein that like boys in boarding school would talk about a fake girlfriend that they met over summer who you wouldn't know from 2 towns over.
Like too good to be true.
As in, yeah, like. What? Like, she's this amazing, cool Italian lady who's got supermodel good looks and thinks Jim is the most fucking amazing, passionate man. They have this fucking bedrock of pure love and understanding. His job is so hard. He has to go, like, all over the world, a really ridiculous schedule, long hours. She'll never say a mean word. She understands implicitly what his job involved.
That's incredible. Like, just that alone is, like, almost unheard of.
Yeah, and like not only that, it's like she manages to not interfere in the world of wrestling, but anyone who ever met her from the world of wrestling has nothing but lovely things to say about her. Like she would love to if a wrestler was in town, they'd come and stay at the house and she'd love to cook for him and stuff like that. And you look after him.
Yeah.
Like Big Show has told all these stories of when he was, a rookie that she'd be, making him his favorite biscuits and all, just like a mother, like this fucking smoking hot babe that Jim Ross gets to go home to every night. It's like genuinely one of the sweetest relationships in wrestling and like non-toxic. A rarity.
Yeah.
I think we could definitely say about that. It's Jim's third wife, I should mention.
Oh, this is his third wife.
His third wife.
Oh.
And the reason I mention that is I read 2 autobiographies and consumed all that other material. The man has never spoken more than 2 words about his other 2 wives.
That's probably for the best.
Yeah, all I know is, he's had kids with these other women as well, like,
Even more reason to shut your mouth, really, about that stuff. If they're ex-wives, yeah.
And I think in the extent of it that he mentioned in his book was just that, they didn't get along. There was, like, a brief period, before he was into wrestling full-time where he, like, kind of, like, right, I'll try to be a normal person. He took over, like, his grandmother owned, like, a department store, and he took that over and ran it, like, for, a year, and he was just miserable doing it, and he broke up from his partner. So, yeah, but he mentioned a few times, him and Jerry on commentary would be like, oh man, we've got so many ex-wives. Like, ha ha ha, divorce sucks. Big into that. Vince McMahon decides, around this time as well that a bit too southern. Don't like that as my vibe. I think it makes my my company look like it's wrestling and not sports entertainment. So Jim is pretty much demoted quickly, and he becomes the main voice for Radio WWF, which was something that he thought, again, he was always a big proponent of radio.
Yeah.
And he thought that was the way that maybe WWF could get into other markets, was from radio. I mean, I think that's a great idea.
Oh, yeah, it is a great idea.
I mean, I would have loved to, back in the day, driving in a car, listen to the pay-per-view on radio.
Yeah,
that would,
genius.
That would definitely work, but, it didn't really take off. And, around this time, something really, really horrible happens to Jim here. And it's the first of a few times this happens. And it is, regrettably, kind of a big part of what he's been through.
Yeah.
Which is that he gets his first bout with Bell's palsy, which is a condition that results in sometimes total, but at least partial paralysis of the face.
Right.
Which obviously makes doing a job as a broadcaster or an announcer, very, very difficult.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
And Vince McMahon, in his infinite grace and sympathy for this horrible condition that's happened less than a year into Jim's run here, he fires him.
Fuck off.
Because he's not telegenic enough, I guess.
What?
As in, looks bad on TV, doesn't look good, don't want that on my show. You're fired.
Fuck off. That's so fucking cruel. That's so cruel.
I mean, do you know much about Bell's palsy as a condition?
I mean, not much. My brother had a bout of Bell's palsy.
Did he?
Yeah, and he got partial facial paralysis.
Yeah.
And he's fine now. He was lucky because sometimes with Bell's palsy it can go away after a few weeks, and sometimes it can be last forever.
I mean, it's quite I can't think of a better word, but it's kind of quite a mysterious illness in many respects.
Yeah, no one knows what causes it.
How and why it comes. I mean, there are things that are believed that can trigger it.
Yeah,
I think there's
stress.
There's a belief that some factors can make you more predisposed to it.
Yeah.
But it's. I mean, I reached out to Billy Keeble from the Attitude Era podcast because over on that show, Jim Ross and his Bell's palsy, that had come up in the course of us reviewing those original pay-per-views. Billy actually had a bout of Bell's palsy himself.
Right, yeah.
So, I reached out and asked you if you okay with maybe sharing his experience. So he sent us in a little kind of a little short description of what it was like.
Right.
For those of you who maybe have heard, Jim Ross has had this, you've heard about it, but you don't really know much about it. So, so Billy says here, I'll preface this by saying that my bout with Bell's palsy was much less severe than JR's. My first bout occurred when I was around 8 or 9, when I woke up one morning and that right side of my face was completely paralyzed.
Oh, bless him.
This lasted for approximately 6 months. The cause of it is still unknown in the medical community, with theories including a link to the herpes virus as well as inflammation of certain nerves in the cranium. I'm sure it'll be no surprise to anyone that an 8-year-old who looked like a cartoon dog Droopy was a source of intense bullying, not only from other children but also teachers.
Oh my god.
I once got told off by my teacher for pulling a funny face at her despite not knowing.
Jesus Christ! That is so cruel. That is so insensitive.
This was despite her knowing about this condition that I had.
I need to make a time machine to go back in time and rescue Billy Keeble
I know,
from these
right?
terrible people.
So horrible. My particular bout included the inability to close my right eye without the use of my hand, and I required surgical tape to keep my eyes closed when I was sleeping, along with the disabling of my tear ducts requiring eye drops every hour, as well as a completely lopsided smile which caused excessive drooling out of that side of my mouth, and having to talk only with the left side of my mouth. I was able to get over it eventually due to the quick action of my parents, and I started a course of corticosteroids. After the first bout of Bell's palsy, I didn't experience it again until university, where several factors, including immense stress and depression, caused it to come back for over a month. Ever since then, however, I will wake up approximately once every few months and find it's back, and I'm required to do facial exercises to fix it. These bouts have all only lasted at most 2 or 3 days. Another trigger for it are depressants, such as alcohol, which can lead to my face drooping over an evening. As for JR, he seems to have never gotten over the initial bout of Bell's palsy, and this is most likely due to him not seeking medical help quick enough, as doctors have found that any treatment started after the first 72 hours of symptoms are likely to be less effective.
Right.
Like JR, however, and like I've mentioned earlier, it gets worse under stress, and I can only imagine how stressful it is working at times in the positions he had in the WWF and WWE. I do know one of JR's worst bouts when the symptoms were excessively worse was shortly after the death of his mother. So I want to thank Billy there for sharing something there in depth that is,
seriously.
I think just putting in there, like hearing it from him there, because it's someone I know or whatever, and maybe someone that you're familiar with, it just kind of puts across like the fear there.
Yeah.
Because Jim Ross has never been someone where he's like, fuck me, this was scary and this was hard.
Like, I can't imagine how scary it must be as well within those first few hours of it happening, because it's the same symptoms as a stroke.
Yeah.
And you have to deal with it in the same way, and that you have to assume the worst and get immediate medical attention.
Yeah, it's
terrifying for anyone.
Yeah, and that's the type of thing like where I can't think of a worse condition to happen to someone. The position they have, a broadcaster.
Yeah.
In the industry they have, which is wrestling, and in the company they have with the boss they have, which is WWF at the time.
Yeah, and also at the time.
I know.
That's a very cruel period of time with a lot of insensitivity and ableism.
I mean, I will say, like, I knew about Bell's palsy, because, someone I knew in university had happened to them as well.
Yeah.
And, like, I knew about it just because, like, well, I know about Bell's palsy just because of
Jim Ross.
Yeah. Like, so, I mean, it raised awareness there in that sense.
Yeah. So, very sensitive Vince, nice man, lovely man, fires him 2 weeks after this bout.
I know, it's again Vince McMahon and sickness, illness, weakness, as he likes to think of it, I guess.
But what I find as well very insensitive about that is that Vince then immediately takes over his job on commentary. It's just like...
do it the way he wants it to be done, I guess. He is...
Until, by the way...
Yeah, until...
Until he gets involved in the steroid trial, which suddenly means...
Oh, we need someone back.
Yeah.
Like. I mean, this is the point as well, when you'd be thinking, like, Jim Ross, like, not just as a broadcaster, but the experience that he had, working, in creative, he was part of booking meetings in WCW and in, UWF and Mid-South with Bill Watts. Like, he's a creative guy. Like, he's someone who knows a lot of, like, the, what works and what doesn't work, in wrestling in America. He'd be someone you'd want to have around, even if you think that he's not, the right look for your TV show at this point.
Yeah.
But needs must, and Vince McMahon, having to loosen the reins a little bit because he's under federal indictment for a steroid trial.
Then he comes crawling back like no, I'm not going to say like a worm, because I like worms, and worms are useful. They're good for the environment.
But if I turned into a worm and I came crawling back, would you still podcast with me, Joe?
But the audacity to fire him when he's going through something so frightening.
Yeah.
And then replace him yourself, and then ask for him to come back when you're, like, involved in a legal case. Like, that's so scummy. Vince McMahon, you piece of shit.
Well, Vince McMahon, he gets acquitted. He comes back, and Jim Ross is fired again.
For fuck's sake!
Now, there's something we should mention about this.
I hate him so much.
I
hate him so much.
This firing here that we should mention, right? This one came because allegedly someone was leaking to the dirt sheets, and this person was almost definitely Jim Ross.
Good for him.
And JR was a bit pissed off about his position in the company and how he's been treated, so we started leaking stuff to dirt sheets. And, I guess the problem about this, though, is that because, we mentioned earlier as well, that mindset that Jim has, when he did his Hall of Fame speech, he was like, I was stupid, I got fired, and I was stupid again, and I got fired. On me. That's all on me.
Wait, what was he stupid for doing the first time?
I think because of, how he handled things, how he reacted to things, how he got upset, maybe how he spoke to people. This kind of like... this man's man shit of like, all right, I'll admit it, I'm wrong 100%. And I'll take
responsibility for like too much stuff.
It's what John Wayne would have done.
I guess so.
And I think
back on the saddle.
Yeah, they bring him back again, and this time you saw this. This was the first time that he was used as a character. In inverted commas, on screen, not just someone, as a broadcaster asking questions or whatever it is.
Yeah.
He would have gotten roughed up a little bit in WCW or whatever. This is like him as a character. He comes out, and this is during like 1996 or thereabouts, where they're getting their ass kicked in the ratings at this point in time. WCW's killing them. They're losing people. Kevin Nash, Diesel, he's gone. Razor Ramon, Scott Hall, he's gone. And Jim Ross comes out and he's like, you guys wondering like why all your favorites have been disappearing here recently? And this is played into all the controversies with Jim. He's like, it's been me. I've been the person who's been making everyone leave here. I've been leaking all the contracts because I'm Dirty Jim Ross and I leak everything. And they haven't cut this promo where it's meant to be this is meant to be a heel promo.
Right.
Where he's like, I got Bell's palsy and I got sick and I couldn't, open up the left side of my face properly and I couldn't smile anymore.
I can't believe that's supposed to be a heel
And that
promo.
heartless bastard Vince McMahon fired me. And everyone's like, no, not poor Vince. Leave him alone.
You're
Jim,
right.
you don't understand. You were too southern and not telegenic enough.
Yeah, obviously, come on, it's your fault.
And they did, and the only reason why people end up booing him is because the payoff of this angle is him. He's like, and I'm going to bring back all your favorites like Diesel and like Razor. And that's when they bring back.
To be clear, they aren't booing him at this. Like,
no,
before this,
people are like, fuck yeah,
they're like
Jim.
cheering and stuff. Quite right as well.
Tell it like it is. People only start booing when the payoff of this angle is him bringing back Diesel in inverted commas and Razor Ramon in inverted commas. I think on both those episodes we did for Nash and Hall, we mentioned how Vince tried to replace them with the IP. You know, like, no one cares about you, they care about the characters.
Yeah.
It turns out that wasn't the case. So
nope.
First Jim Ross heel turn, off we go. And I can't think of a more concise, like, why is Vince McMahon so shit?
Yeah.
And why is the wrestling business so shit?
Yeah.
As Bell's palsy, fired, you're back, fired again, let's bring him back and let's make an angle out of it and do something really insulting to the fans.
So fucking weird.
I kind of feel like you deserve to be beaten by Eric Bischoff at this point.
Absolutely.
Like,
Absolutely.
They're running circles around you in that other show. Fucking hell. But he's brought back again. He's a third man on the commentary booth now. So it's going to be Vince McMahon, King, and Jim Ross there to give a little bit of southern sizzle. And this is when Vince says, you know what you should do, Jim? Let's lean into this. Let's put that cowboy hat on you, black Stetson, and we'll call you good old JR. Not Jim Ross, you're good old JR.
So that wasn't Jim's idea?
No, Jim hated it.
What?
Yeah, making me a fucking parody, a caricature. I mean, think about it though. Like, if you're kind of like, you're a southern guy, you've gotten shit from the boss, because you're too southern, and he's like, right, we'll bring you back, but I want you to wear the cowboy hat, and you're a cowboy man now. You good old JR. Like, it's weird saying good old JR and it not being like, yeah, good old JR. Yeah. Awesome. But like, at the time for him, it's like, I'm Jim Ross. I'm not a parody. I'm a sportscaster. I'm not a kind of character. You got the lad in the crown and the lad in the cowboy hat, like,
I see. Hey, speaking of the lad in the crown, how come he never got beef with Vince for being too southern?
I guess because Jerry's a wrestler and he was such a big draw and a star. I think that
Vince wouldn't dare. That's what it comes down to.
I think Vince is much more confident in... I mean, when we've talked about writers and we've talked about producers and backstage people on this show and how Vince treats them, and then we talk about the wrestlers.
Yeah.
The wrestlers, yes, he's had toxic relationships with, he's fucking treated them like shit, but we always invariably talk about like, father figure stuff and manipulation. True. Whereas straight up bullying.
Yeah. He does that to the other people, yeah.
He does. He expects ridiculous things from the writers and the producers and the announcers. I think in the Foley episode we talked about how he speaks in the headsets.
Yeah.
Jim has like developed this point quite a thick skin, I think you can imagine.
Oh yeah.
And also, I think they have this air of kind of, you should be grateful for your job now.
Wow.
We fired you twice, so we can do it again, like, But this, segues then from it's the three of them, and then it's Tim and Vince and King, and then it's him and Vince and Kevin Kelly, and then it's just him and King. That becomes the kind of around 97.
Right.
That becomes the duo that sticks, and they were together as an announced team for around 4 years at that point. The full run of the Attitude Era, basically.
Right.
And that's, I think, the iconic duo that everyone remembers.
Yeah.
Jerry and Jim together. I mean, how are they as a duo? Do you like them? For me, that's what I grew up with. So they're always going to be my main guys or whatever, I guess.
I can never get behind it because of Jerry Lawler. I fucking hate him. I hate him, and I don't even think he's good at his job. That's the thing. It's not just like, go away, Heat, and I hate him as a person because of everything he did. Because he did a lot of shit, by the way. You can Google it until we do the episode. But I also don't think he's a very good commentator. Like, I think he can have his moments depending on who is in the ring. But if there's a woman, and pretty much, like, not just women as well, he's like this with certain other people as well. He just, like, doesn't know how to work. He literally just doesn't do his job anymore. I think he's very good at advertising. I think the ad slots Jerry Lawler is very good at. But I think that's like as far as that goes. I think he brings Jim Ross down. I think considering how iconic they are just shows how amazing JR really is.
I think, I don't agree with you in your I always have, like, there's certain things I think that King does. I mean, I agree with you broad strokes about the things you don't like about him.
Yeah, everyone agrees he's a shit heel when it comes to women.
But I feel like there's a part of me, like, I have this fucking soft spot for the heel commentator.
Nah,
and I feel like, I feel like he's able to bring that out of JR. There was times during the Attitude Era where he'd just be like, kind of like, Vince McMahon, he's so great. I love everything he's doing. And Jim would be like, how could you say that, you corporate ass kisser? Like, he'd get... and Paul Heyman always said, you want to get the best out of JR, piss him off.
Yeah.
Because he lets himself be,
I agree with that, but I just don't think Jerry Lawler is the only person who could do that job. Like, I think Bobby Heenan did that just as well, if not 100 times better.
I mean, for me, Paul Heyman and Jim Ross, that is
I would agree.
The God tier.
That's God tier, yeah.
We watched a few clips of, like, they would, like, literally, like, stop the action in the ring, and they looked at the two of them, they'd be throwing their stuff down, like, come on, you want to fight me, hillbilly boy? Like, they'd fucking get each other's throats. Just, like, knowing how, like, Heyman knew how to wind him up, and JR, it's like all the best wrestlers who are like kind of act like it's real, let the real emotion come out, and he lets himself get into that state where he gets so wound up about, and that's what made it so, passionate. The thing about King, though, that surprised me from reading his book, and you mentioned, he makes Jim kind of like, it shows you how good he is. Jerry is like the master of not prepping at all. I don't say Jim didn't want to, no, as in like he did fuck all.
Yeah, I know, right? Don't consider that masterful at all.
Jim didn't want to know the finishes of the matches, but in terms of like formats, what's going to happen on the show, what's next, all that, Jim would have all that, and King would just kind of sit down. He'd be like, he wouldn't go to the production meetings, be like, what are we doing tonight? He just kind of...
No wonder he's so shit then.
He'd wing it.
Yeah.
But
I can tell.
I think that made Jim raise his game. And I think Jim liked that. I think Jim liked the fact that the guy beside him wasn't going to try and step over him. He was just going to kind of do the bare minimum or whatever.
No, I have no doubts in my mind that Jim Ross loved working with Jerry Lawler.
Yeah.
And I think if you were to ask Jim who his favourite commentary tag team partner would be, it would be Lawler.
I think it's because for him, it's like, it's the iconic duo.
Yeah,
it's the one that people remember, And like, I remember them interviewing them in like 1999 and 2000 being like, yeah, we'll be doing this, till we're 100 with long grey beards. I'm like, yeah, you will. Like, it kind of made the fans think that. I want to go through a couple of JR-isms on commentary here, if you know what any of them are and what they mean. Jezebel, Joe.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Jezebel.
Are you? Why are you familiar with Jezebel? Reading your Bible recently, have you?
No, I'm just aware of the term.
Where would you have heard Jezebel?
I mean, wrestling, definitely. But it's just one of those words that, like, sometimes gets thrown at women by old men say it to young women all the time.
Have you ever been called a Jezebel?
Yeah, I've been called a Jezebel.
You've been called
many
a Jezebel?
times. Pretty sure my own dad has called me a Jezebel.
Oh, was that because you hit him with a loaded Gucci purse or something like that? Damn Jezebel. But have I ever called you a Jezebel in jest?
I don't know, you might have done. You're allowed to.
I'm allowed to call you Jezebel.
Yeah.
Fun story about Jezebel. It's a word that was used in the Bible to describe like a ne'er-do-well woman. A woman who had no virtue, had done something evil or whatever it was. And I know this because one of my first classes in religion, like the word in secondary school, in a Catholic school, the word Jezebel came up, and I was like, yes. Hand got raised. Like, I know what that means, and I was like, And I got pegged early on as being like this kind of like a kid with a knack for theology.
Wow.
Because Jim Ross had been like, there's a woman, she's a Jezebel. I mean, any women do you think Jim Ross would have referred to as a Jezebel back in the day? All of them?
All of them.
Not everyone. Not everyone's a Jezebel.
Linda, not a Jezebel.
Linda wasn't a Jezebel?
Yeah, she's not sexy enough. To be a Jezebel, you have to be sexy.
Yeah, but there's been sexy ladies who weren't called Jezebels.
Like who?
I don't think he ever called Sable a Jezebel.
What?
Yeah. She was only briefly heel when he would have been running commentary, but I'm pretty sure he never called her a Jezebel.
The thing is, though, with Jim Ross, they don't have to be heels. He's called face women Jezebels before.
No.
I'm pretty sure.
No way. Have you got an instance of that?
Not off the top of my head.
Then
I don't take notes, but I am pretty sure.
Pretty sure? I know
I'm confident.
Used to call Stephanie a Jezebel all the time.
Yeah, obviously.
She prime target, but she, when she was like, evil, young heel Stephanie. I think if you're a younger woman as well, that makes you even more of a Jezebel.
That's what I said.
Yeah. So, Stephanie, Trish would have been called a Jezebel.
Yeah, obviously.
Although Michael Cole used to call Trish Stratus a witch instead.
Oh, really?
That witch, Trish Stratus. Is one better than the other or worse than the other?
They're different. I think Jezebel is worse.
Yeah. Tori used to get called a Jezebel a lot. Terry Runnels used to get called a Jezebel a lot.
Right.
Basically, yeah, I'd say a good 80% of the women on screen back in the day would have been called a Jezebel at some point or another. I think it's one that's been retired to the history books now.
Good. It can fuck off.
Tougher than a $2 steak.
I love that one.
It's so good.
It's so good.
I mean, do you know what that one means?
Yeah, obviously.
You ever had a $2 steak?
No. Well,
I think.
there was a time me and my friends threw a steak party. And we went to Morrison's and we all bought really cheap steaks to cook.
Because it's a party, baby.
It's a steak party. And we all cooked something like 6 steaks each.
What the fuck, Joe?
And they only cost like £8 for a pack. So it was like, if they probably did work out as $2 steaks.
Fucking neon red steaks, like so bright, like, you know.
Yeah, as if we cooked them that well.
No, I meant that. I didn't think there'd be any marbling or dry aging on those steaks.
That.
So it is.
Yeah.
They were tough steaks.
They were fine.
Yeah.
We were students.
Interesting.
Novelty to eat a steak.
Is there any wrestler that you would say confidently you think is tougher than a $2 steak?
Taz.
Taz, tougher than a $2 steak? Yeah, definitely.
Ken Shamrock.
Yeah, anyone who can kind of like no-sell a neck injury. Sherry Martel is tougher than a $2 steak. And I think he would have called her a Jezebel as well. Rare you get both.
Probably.
Very rare you get both, you know. It's a twofer there, you know.
Anyone who can legitimately fight, I think, is tougher than $2 steak.
This match is got bowling shoe tendencies.
I have no idea what that means.
It means it's ugly.
Okay.
Or
what does
a
that
bad
mean?
match.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, bad match. Because bowling shoes are ugly. Allegedly.
Why is it okay to say on commentary that something is a bad match?
That's the thing, right? And, you know, this is someone who still has great nostalgia for Jim Ross, but also has the confidence of having done all these pay-per-views with him, where he just says, like, if there's a match and it's like, oh, that's not a great match, he'll be like, don't break out the star rating for this one, folks.
Wow.
Or this match maybe, or like the worst one he would do, like 2 women are going to have like kind of, you know, a Playboy pillow fight, or, you know, they're going to have a match that's like, all right, it's going to be a crap match. Yeah. And he'll be like, well, this one's going to have bowling shoe ugly tendencies. You know, he'll say it beforehand. It's like, this is going to suck, basically. Wow, okay. It's like his coded language to say at home, like, I know good wrestling and this ain't it.
Right.
And I just think, why would you ever say that on commentary? Something on your show was bad.
It's one thing for him to say it. It's another thing for him to be allowed to say it. I'm amazed he didn't immediately get screamed at by Vince McMahon.
Yeah, I know.
Shut up.
I know, that's interesting, right?
Because it's quite unprofessional. Like, I actually quite like the idea of being able to say, as a commentator, nah, this match, I don't like it. Because I think, as a commentator, you should be allowed to have opinions.
Yeah.
Not the same as burying, I think. But, like...
That's the thing, though. Every burial began as an opinion at one point, didn't it? Like...
But that's the thing, like, as a producer or a promoter, they need to shut that shit down, I'm sure, from their perspective. Because there's always going to be people out there who like the shit matches.
Okay, we're going to get into a couple of controversial ones here now.
Okay.
He's beating him like a government mule.
I don't really know what that means either.
This is coming back from, I believe it's the post-slavery era. This would have happened where if, you know, slaves who were emancipated were in certain states entitled to, you're going to get like a plot of land and you're going to get a mule as well. So you can become farmers and start tilling the great land. This is, you know, during quite a trying time in America, let's just say. And the idea was that, you know, a lot of these, you know, former slaves were given like patches of dust and dirt, like, you know, crap, like really hard to turn it into a farm.
Yeah.
And you only had the mule, so the mule got hit all the time and, you know, worked really hard. So hence getting beaten like a government mule.
Okay.
So that's where that comes from.
Right.
Makes you think about old farmers being sold a shoddy American dream. It's quite a dark one, actually, in its own right.
It's very dark, yeah.
How about this one? He's goofier than a pet coon.
No idea. I mean, goofy obviously means, goofy.
This one stopped because, I mean, I used to hear that and be like, that's a slur.
That's what I always thought was a slur, but is it not also an animal? Is that what he means? But, like, is it one of those, like, dog whistle things where it's like, well, you say it's an animal, it really means it's a slur?
Well, yeah, I used to ever hear that being like, whoa, hang on a second there, like, that's a racist thing, right? You know? And then he did a post on his blog once where he's like, look, that's not what it is. What it comes from is in Oklahoma, sometimes when you'd be bored, you'd capture a live raccoon and try and keep it as a pet. But because
What?
But because it's a wild animal and it doesn't want to be kept in as a pet, it would start scratching at you and going crazy. Hence, crazy or goofy as a pet coon.
Okay, well, just use the full word. Just say raccoon. You're not saving much time by dropping that syllable.
Just invoking, like, it's not Pokemon, Jim. Like, you know, it doesn't work like that one. And probably one of the most important ones, a slobber knocker.
Yeah, I know slobber knockers.
What's a slobber knocker? If I say, we're going to match here tonight, it's going to be a slobber knocker.
I don't know how to describe it, but I know what it means.
Okay, how about this then? Could you tell me a match, could you book a match for me that you're like, this is going to be a slobber knocker?
Okay, JBL versus Vader.
Oh, Joe! That's how you fantasy book. That's a slobber knocker. Congratulations.
Right? Thank you. I do understand it, but yeah, I don't know how to I wouldn't know the definition or how to describe it to someone else.
I mean, it would be basically when Michael Cole says that match is going to be physical. You know, it's
Is it? Because I always think physical means boring.
Yeah, I know. Michael Cole always sells you the false bill of goods, you know, with physical.
I imagine it meaning kind of like a bit rough and ready, a bit sloppy.
Yeah.
But not bad. Like fun, definitely.
Hard
but also,
hitting.
Yeah, hard hitting.
High impact.
But not neat. Like I wouldn't say anything with Bret Hart would ever be a slobber knocker.
But that's the thing as well, you know, you would pick out ones like often if it's someone like, you know, a heavyweight like a Vader or someone like that, or a Big Show, it's going to be a slobber knocker. Kane or Undertaker, he'd say slobber knocker. But there'd be times as well where it's just like, it's a big match, like a Rock and Stone Cold, it's going to be a slobber knocker because it's just a big exciting match. And it became kind of the word that Jero would use to promote a match. Where it originally comes from is back in the football days, back when he was watching as a kid, one of the announcers would say, like, when you got hit so bad, and this is before they had pads and helmets, you imagine the fucking head trauma.
I do not want to imagine
when someone gets hit so hard, the goo comes out of their mouth.
Ew.
That hit would be referred to as a slobber knocker.
That's always what I thought it came from, but I just made that up. So it's good to know my imagination is accurate.
It is. It's very accurate. You're in the Jim Ross wavelength there.
Yeah.
Hey, we got a slobber knocker of a match that we watched with JR commentating. Many of you said this was one of his greatest calls of all time. We looked at Hell in a Cell 1998.
Oh, we've come full circle.
We've come full circle. We recreated our first date and everything. We watched Hell in a Cell, and then I went out and broke some patio furniture afterwards.
We need to record this in bed.
I think
that's where I watched this match for the first time. I think breakfast in bed, watching Hell in a Cell.
It's romantic, right?
Very romantic.
Very romantic. Jim Ross, I think, is at the peak of his descriptive powers here. You know, the voice a little bit. We're in 1998 now. The voice a little bit different, a little bit deeper, I think.
Yeah.
But there's a richness to his voice. It's like I don't know what it is. It's like when people talk about the kind of the rich honey molasses.
Molasses. I was going to say molasses. Yeah.
You know, he's obviously not the same type of voice, but it's what Benoit Blanc has got in Knives Out. There's a certain warmth to the voice.
Treacly kind of richness.
I really was taken aback by the poetry again in this one. On this hot summer night, there is a chill in the air that signifies the arrival of the phenom of the World Wrestling Federation. Holy shit.
That's amazing.
You can't do much better than describing The Undertaker than that. And the thing about this match, you know, Mankind and Undertaker in Hell in a Cell, I mean, you don't need us to tell you, that's a match that involves some pretty crazy antics that go on. Hearing him get worried on commentary, it's a very emotive thing. He gets worried, I get worried.
Yeah.
When they're up on top of a cell going, I don't like this a damn bit, folks. I'm like, fuck yeah, I don't like this a damn bit either, you know?
There's a way he describes that when The Undertaker climbs on top of the cell, which is, there's nothing between The Undertaker and a concrete floor than imagination.
Oh, fucking imagination.
Yeah.
There's another one that he uses here as well, like, and this is, I think, early enough after, you know, this match, I think we get like 60 seconds in and Mick Foley takes the famous fall off the Hell in the Cell.
Yeah.
And we get the, you know, with God as my witness, he's broken in half, which is, you know, he said that quite a few times over the years, but I think that's the point where it's always like, that's the iconic call or whatever it is. He then starts talking about one of his classic ones, which is, they say at home, you know, they learn how to fall, you know. This is quite a contentious one with folks, you know. Back in the day, he used to say this all the time. He still does it in AEW. Do you mean him talking about people at home being like, kind of like, oh, wrestling's fake, you know? But he'll be like, how the hell they learn how to fall off the Hell in the Cell or a 15-foot ladder or whatever it is.
He's right.
I mean, I do like that, you know. I think that he's right to kind of, you know, when I was a kid listening to that, I'd be like, yeah, fuck the haters who like think wrestling's fake. It's not, it's real, like, in that sense, you know. And the thing about this is around this time as well is that, you know, he is the head of talent relations by this point, so there's this extra level of care because he's like meant to be in charge of looking after these guys, I guess, for lack of a better term.
And he signed Mick as well, didn't he?
He signed Mick.
Yeah.
I don't know what goes through your head when you're like, you know, that's as real emotion as it gets.
Yeah.
The concern is real there.
And like, even if he hadn't signed Mick, the thought of like the only thing I can compare it to is our live shows, but like the thought of something going wrong when you're performing in front of a live audience and you have to keep professional, you have to keep going. Like, luckily nothing has ever gone wrong at any of our live shows.
No, I've managed to not fall off the Hell in the Cell yet, but I insist it's set up at the London Podcast Festival every year, just in case, you know.
But it's so impressive to be able to continue that level of professional authority while you are genuinely concerned that, like, you know, because you have to have complete narrative control in a way of the match.
Yeah.
And you have to kind of speak in a way where it's going to look good no matter if the person involved is dead.
Because Jerry at one point in this match is like, yeah.
He literally says, he goes, that's it, he's dead.
Thanks, Jerry.
Great work, Jerry.
Imagine if he was, like, hell. Like. But yeah, you're right. There's a compassion in his voice, but he's not taken away from the spectacle. Yeah. You know? And it's his ability to shift those modes. When you have him being taken away, Mankind on the stretcher, and Jim Ross is like, at one point he's apologizing to you because you didn't want, you know, this isn't the event that we wanted to give you. He's despondent because someone has been hurt so bad. He's upset, you know, because people don't talk about, you know, the Spanish announcers got like knocked out, like, you know, when he went through, there's all this chaos around him. And then the second Mick Foley gets off that stretcher, all of a sudden he's like, hey, wait a minute now. And then we start slowly shifting gears. How the hell's he still standing? What's he doing? He starts climbing up the cell, and all of a sudden, like, it's like he's conducting the audience.
That's so accurate.
And the fact that the audience can't hear him.
I know.
That blew my... When I first went to live wrestling, it blew my mind that you couldn't hear it.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, what? I'm not going to hear them talking?
Yeah.
And like, I think it's because of Jim Ross all the time. I thought, like, they're hearing that and going, how's he still standing? But he's like a conductor. Yeah. But he's not in control of them. No. He's reacting to them almost.
And it's very similar, actually, to the way really good old school and indie wrestlers will conduct a match themselves by feeding off the audience.
Yeah.
And really good wrestlers will do that. They'll anticipate how the audience is reacting and respond to that accordingly by, like, you know, stamping in the ring, clapping their hands, doing certain moves or tags. And Jim Ross it's the exact same thing, but it's the audio equivalent.
Yeah, that's it.
He is, you know, he's obviously got Vince McMahon screaming in one ear.
And how do you do that with that as well at the same time? I know, right?
But he's also got another ear on the audience and their reactions, and then also paying full attention to what's happening in the ring and coming up with things to say at the same time. That's juggling so many balls.
I know. I mean,
and then also, oh no, the match has gone wrong and the guy I hired might be dead.
Yeah, there's the personal element of it as well. I mean, I think the more that, you know, in this podcast, when we try to learn more about the commentary and the process behind that, the more and more I think that it's like, you know, I used to be someone who'd shit on announcers all the time. If they were bad, I'm like, fuck you, fuck that, he's awful, bring back Jim Ross. But I'm like, you know what? With all that shit going on, particularly in the period of time where you had Vince McMahon in your ear, if you could even do that job at all and not burst into tears,
I couldn't.
Like,
no way.
You deserve an award. Yet alone doing it well, yet alone doing it really, really well. Yeah. You know, that is almost like the fact that he makes it seem easy as well, you know?
He makes it seem effortless.
He's not self-conscious, I think. I think that's a big part of it. It feels like he's not... there's a part in this match where he gets so flustered about what happens. He literally goes, geez, God, but don't... Like, he just splutters out a word. Yeah. And I think if I was doing commentary, I'd do that. I'd be like, Jesus fucking Christ, what did I just do? And I'd be thinking about that for the rest of the match, like, you know? And he's just like, no, that's what happened. Thumbtacks came out. This guy went into it like a pin cushion. Jeez, God,
keyboard smash.
You know? Like, there's little bits in the match, like when Mankind is like, he's not smiling, he's trying to, you know, show there's a hole in his tooth. And he just, like, he gives us this new layer all of a sudden where it's like, it's not sympathy about Mankind. Now he's perturbed. It's like disturbing. This guy's smiling. Yeah. What the fuck am I seeing here? You know? Oh my God almighty.
What I found really impressive was that when Mankind goes through the ceiling of the Hell in the Cell and his tooth goes through his lip and up into his nose, Jerry Lawler, professional wrestler, you know, has been in legitimate fights.
Yeah.
You know, stuff like that. He has no idea what's going on. He doesn't know what the fuck that is in Mick Foley's nose. But Jim Ross immediately is like, that's his tooth. His tooth has gone through his lip and into his nose. And that's amazing. Like, Mick Foley himself didn't know that is what happened. Like, that's why he's smiling, is because as far as he's concerned, he's just showing you a gap in his mouth. He doesn't realize his tooth is up his nose. He just puts that level of thought in. It's like, okay, so this has happened and now that has happened, which means this.
I just think it's very interesting that he's someone from that old school who believes these things that have to be true about wrestling, and he is now operating in an environment where it's like Vince Russo's the head writer, Vince McMahon has got this vision, wrestling is, you know, somewhere between like, you know, something crazy you'd see on the news, like Cops or something like that, and like Jerry Springer, and a violent cartoon, and like, you know, South Park. It's crude, it's all these things that wrestling shouldn't be, and you got this guy here who's holding on to, like, treating it the way that Bill Watts would have wanted to be treated back in the 70s and the 80s, where it's real, and he's constantly making you aware of the sacrifice and the brutality, and like, you at home, you don't understand what they're going through here. When this match ends and he says, in 25 years, I've never witnessed anything like this. These two men have given you everything in their bodies. They gave of you their souls tonight. And these people in Pittsburgh, they are standing and cheering for the effort and the desire.
Oh,
I'm literally giving myself goosebumps. And I just want to say, I don't know if I'd have the appreciation and respect for what wrestlers have been through had it not been that this man was maybe the narrator that I had all these years growing up. Because I knew a lot of kids who watched wrestling who maybe didn't pay as much attention to JR, and they were just like, yeah, get him up there on the cell and throw him off again. Whereas I'd be like, oh my God, Mick, no. You know, and I think that for the wrestlers, they want the spectacle to be put over, but I think a lot of wrestlers are probably more than a bit appreciative that side of it was, you know, there's a way this Hell in a Cell could have been put over where it's like, you know, like ECW, like fucking, oh my God, this is the wildest thing. Call everyone, tell them what you just seen. And Jim Ross is almost like somewhere between an awards ceremony and a funeral here at the end of this one. This is a sad thing that you've seen. Yeah. But fucking hell, let's hand it to these guys for giving it to you. Like, that's amazing. That's, I think, you know,
maybe part of that as well comes from the fact that he did this talent relations side of things where he's kind of like, you know, maybe not friends necessarily with the whole roster, but he does have that kind of like personal working relationship where he does know them all one to one. He's having these chats with them. He's getting to know them.
Just think about how hard that is as well for a second. In his book, he describes like a typical day at the office in WWE at this time. He's in Stamford, Connecticut. He's living in this, you know, in the city. You know, he doesn't like living there. He wants to be back in Oklahoma. He's miserable. You know, he's describing like he's been in the office at like 10 in the morning. He's got loads of meetings all day. He has to do the payroll. He has to do all this like admin stuff. There's this, you know, less glamorous side. That's just being on the road with the boys and signing cool wrestlers.
HR, basically.
Yeah, he's doing an office job. And he's talking about, you know, how Jan is making these lovely like egg mayonnaise sandwiches. And like, you know, we've all been there. I remember this all the time when I was a teacher. You got the lovely lunch. You're sat there and it's like fucking 10 in the morning and you're hungry. And you're like, and you know, you're so stressed out. Like, I'll eat it now and I'll get something else later on. Yeah. And he's talking as well then about being like, Ken Shamrock is like, you know, was late to the arena and didn't show up for a house show, and I have to go tell the world's most dangerous man now that he's been unprofessional and he needs to book up his ideas or Vince is going to be pissed off. And he's like, I'm genuinely scared.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And he's like, Jerry goes up to Jerry Briscoe, I'm like, can you come with me in case he like
kills me?
Yeah, he puts me in a hole and you need to pry me out of it and stuff like that.
Ken Shamrock doing that though is really funny.
And you know, the other end of the spectrum as well, when they're having, you know, problems, you know, drug testing and stuff like that, Owen Hart hears that and gets a load of powdered sugar from some donuts and puts it all over his face and goes up and being like, Jim, I hear you looking for me, man. Like, just like all, you know, the cast of characters. Yeah. He's the guy who had to go to Yokozuna and Big Van Vader and say, you're not losing enough weight that we in the office are happy with. We're sending you to this experimental weight loss program at a university. Oh. You know, do that, we're going to have to wire your jaw shut so you can stop eating, like, you know? Horrible. And then he's getting calls then from, you know, this is like it was like Harvard or something like that. And the ring up going, yeah, hi, this is the professor here from Harvard at the weight loss study. Both of your guys have broken out of the compounds. And
good for them.
You know, they're going eating like burgers and stuff like that, you know. And like, you know, there's no shortage of like missteps that he did over those years, and I'm not, you know, but I think it's important to know that it is the worst job in wrestling.
Yeah, definitely.
The
horrible.
Absolute worst job in wrestling. And as tough as it is, it's about to get tougher because at the end of 1998, in the middle of a pay-per-view in the United Kingdom, his mother's died like a few days previously. He was very close with his mother and he was, you know, very distraught and upset by it, but the grind never stops on the road. Yeah. Can't
imagine boss Vince McMahon has much sympathy for losing your mother.
Yeah, well, we're off on the airplane now. You're jet lagged. You're going to call it live pay-per-view and all this stuff. Bell's palsy attack in the middle of the show.
Oh my god.
And it's a testament either to the fact that, like, I don't know, I'm incredibly non-observant, or to the fact that he is so good at his job that we did, like, when we covered that on the pay-per-views that we were reviewing back in the day for the Out of Your Podcast, we didn't even notice.
Which is fascinating to me because he said in interviews that he had to hold up his face.
Yeah, that's what he did,
so he could continue talking as clearly as he normally does. And that's just, I mean, I can't imagine what that's like, and also how impressive that is that he was able to continue.
I know, to go the whole way, the whole bout through it, like,
with all that terror as well in your head of like, it's happening again, and my mum is dead.
It's absolutely shocking. You know,
yeah.
I can't imagine what that's like. So
it's like literally, I can only imagine it was literally his worst nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, it's happening at the worst. The worst thing that can happen to you is happening at the worst possible time.
In front of the boss who previously fired you for having a bout of Bell's palsy off air.
Yeah, so he doesn't get fired this time, but you know.
I mean, you know what? I wonder if the reason he wasn't fired this time is because literally Vince McMahon would have had a lawsuit on his hands.
I mean, I think at this point he was also kind of, you know, he's indispensable to the company in many respects.
Yeah.
Because there was no one else who could do those two jobs.
Yeah, that's true.
And this is the part now where I think Vince McMahon at this point has probably made up his mind that he does want another announcer at some point.
Mm.
But, you know, Jim Ross is still the top guy. So
he's starting to grow Michael Cole in a lab.
Well, that's what's happened around this time now. Is, you know, JR has to take time off because, you know, he can't, like, he can't actually. This bout is much worse. He can't actually speak properly. You know, it's too taxing for him. He wants to get back to work as soon as possible. So in the meantime, he is producing Michael Cole, who's now on TV on Raw, in the headsets, and he's done this with Michael Cole. He did it with Mike Adamle. There's like 4 different guys over the years where Jim Ross literally is training his replacement.
Wow!
And every one of them have all come out and said he was so great. He helped me out so much. He mentored me. Like, I don't know. Like, it's a pretty fucking bitter pill to swallow. Where I'm like, I've been pushed out the door, and you're my replacement. And I'm going to give you every bit of knowledge I have.
Yeah, but again, that talent relations side, I think, would really help, because the number of times I'm sure he had to have chats with wrestlers and tell them to do what he is doing here. And tell, you know, like Shawn Michaels, like, you got to put over this guy, even though I know you're intimidated by him taking your spot.
Yeah.
Because that's your job. You've got to do that.
Part of it, yeah. I think as well now, at this point in time, Jim Ross, you know, he is someone who Russo didn't get along with. His writing partner, Ed Ferreira, didn't get along with. Jim Cornette. And Ross usually kind of butted heads with those guys, but there were a lot of, like, this is when the writers started being brought in and stuff like that, and JR didn't like, you know, these young punk kids coming in and telling what to do, and everyone was like, oh, he's the old dinosaur. So basically, it gets decided that this man who's been through another bout of Bell's palsy, and it didn't work so well the first time, but maybe the second time, in 1999, maybe this is the time that the fans are finally ready to embrace bitter heel Jim Ross, who's angry that he got Bell's palsy. So we watched some segments from JR in 1999 where he comes out to lambast Michael Cole and the world of wrestling for turning its back on him because he got sick again. And the most heartwarming thing about this entire bullshit 4 or 5 week run is that the crowd are with him and on his side every single step of the way. It's
even though
hilarious.
Credit to him, as much as I'm sure he hated doing it, he puts his heart and soul into being as nasty as possible. Like, even though the stuff he's saying, I actually do agree. Like, I agree with a lot of what he's saying.
I agree with everything he says.
But the way he says it is very nasty. It's very aggressive and quite scary. Because he's a good actor.
Oh, yeah.
And even still, the crowd are completely behind him.
Like, when he picks up little double denim Canadian tuxedo Michael Cole, and he's like, get your narrow Yankee ass in this ring. And you're like, no, not little Michael. Not precious Michael. And he, like, slaps him in the willy. Get out of my ring. And it was like, woo, JR, fucking get rid of him.
Get that twink.
There's like widespread JR chants in the arena when he does this. And then they like have like, you know, this bit where he's like sits at the announce desk and they have like to send someone out being like, you know, Jim, you gotta go and all that. And he's like, mid-card wrestler's gonna tell me to get out of here. Next week he's back. He's got his own special little announce desk that they have set up for him. I love
that, in front of the other announce desk.
And Jerry is there with Cole, and JR keeps turning on, you want to be with the A-team, King? You want to sit back there at the B-team? we're Monday Night Raw. This is what we're doing here. And everyone's cheered him nonstop. And
so chaotic.
To the man's credit, he keeps going, can you believe all these people are booing me? They're booing old JR. I'm like, they're not. They love this. I love this. You know, long before, like, you know, AEW, I'm not saying it's going to solve all of his problems, but you get JR his own little special desk in front of them.
And then turn off the microphone.
It's like Creed's blog in the office. Like, you know, I just loved it. It was so fucking funny. And like, again, they went like 4 or 5 weeks doing this.
What, with his own desk?
No, it's just, you know, starting off with him. He came out and he complained to Bart Gunn, then Michael Cole, then they had him do the desk for a couple of weeks.
Because the desk thing, as funny as it was chaotic.
It was mad. We tried to watch a match with it. It was mad.
They were all talking over each other.
It's like 2015 commentary, basically. The good old days, you know. It was absolutely mad. And the idea of it was they wanted to turn the fans on Jim.
Right.
Make them sick of him, you know. But this is, you know, around the same time where Ed Ferreira, he did a cracking Bell's palsy Jim Ross impression. This is around the time where Ed Ferreira, he'd crack everyone up with his really funny impression of Jim. And after he had the second bout of Bell's palsy, like, they had him come out on screen and be like, hey, I'm going to do my impression of a man who's been struck with this horrible affliction twice.
Jesus.
You know, when Russo and Ferreira went over to the other company, they turned it into a character, Oklahoma. He'd just come out and screw his face up and be like, you know, and make, you know, and you have to watch that.
Heartless. That's really cruel.
That's like, there's bullying and there's kind of like, oh, it's a tough business, kid. Everyone says shit to everyone. And then there's like what can only be described as a campaign of hatred against someone.
Is this around the same time that Vince did the impression?
Vince did well, I showed you the random clip of him just pulling a horrible face on him.
With the cowboy hat, yeah.
No, that was just on a random 2011 episode of Raw where Jim wasn't even on screen at that point. He just like, I'm just going to do it. Just to remind everyone I still do this.
Because you pointed out he does it literally in front of the Be a Star campaign poster, which, by the way, for people who don't know, Be a Star, the campaign, is an anti-bullying campaign. That's the whole point.
Would you like to pipe bomb now and cut off your mic because you mentioned the Be a Star? But yeah, I mean, it comes from the top. Jim's opinion of it all, and he's forgiven Russo and Ferreira. His opinion of it was like, all the bosses laughed at it and they were just sycophants, so they wanted to impress the boss, and we impressed the boss by, you know, making JR laugh. And Brian Gerwitz in his book recently, he was like, yeah, you know, we pitched this stuff because it made Vince happy, and if we made Vince happy, that meant your stuff got on TV. So absolutely. And the idea as well is like, because he was so closely associated with Stone Cold Steve Austin, the idea also was then, you know, he's brought back, you know, WrestleMania that year, he's brought back as the commentator, and they're like, you know, people know that Austin and him have this kind of relationship. So the theory then is like, right, if people love JR so much, let's use him as a sympathetic character. Let's use him as a way for fans to feel bad for Stone Cold Steve Austin. So we got to see him and his interactions with Triple H in China.
Ah, yes.
Were you shocked by how this all went down, Joe? I mean, how did this sit with you? Jim Ross and the game, Triple H, your favourite wrestler in the world.
I mean, it made me like JR more.
Yeah.
Because he hates Triple H. I like that about him.
So they have Triple H, he's wanting a title shot, and the way to get the title shot is by threatening to break Jim Ross's arm. Mm-hmm. And you have Jim Ross getting his arm broken in kayfabe anyway. This did go some way to making me like Triple H a bit more as well, because I do like very nasty heel Triple H. He's compelling. Yeah, he is. And I think Jim Ross is a sympathetic character.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think when you have a compelling heel and a sympathetic character, that's magic. This devastated me as a child, by the way.
I can only imagine.
Absolutely devastated me.
Nasty Triple H with scary China as well.
And the worst thing about it was that because he was such a black tar heel version of himself at the time, Jerry Lawler was just like, I've been waiting for this for years. I can't. Just fucking delighted with himself about it. It was horrible. I remember when the video game Attitude came out at the time, and it was Shane McMahon and King on commentary. And the reason why JR wasn't on commentary is because he'd had his bout of Bell's palsy at that point. But my cousin was like, no, it's because Triple H broke his arm, so he couldn't do the commentary.
Couldn't do commentary.
He was too traumatized. He was too traumatized. I was like,
as if that would stop JR.
That son of a bitch, Triple H. I hate him so much, you know. But yeah, this does lead to a match eventually. We did get to watch Stone Cold Steve Austin and Jim Ross team up against China and Triple H. The scariest part about it being that Triple H and Steve Austin went off and brawled in the crowd, and we were left with the very, very worrying combination of China and Jim Ross in the middle of the ring. So Jim finds himself, this is the first time of many, by the way, that he is brought in as a competitor to be a wrestler in the WWE. I'm ashamed to say how many Jim Ross matches we actually watched for this, because boy, there's quite a few, yeah. You know. We didn't even watch him and Triple H main event in Madison Square Garden.
Wow.
Yeah, there you go, 2005. Check it out, folks. But yeah, I mean... He's out of his element here. How did Jim get on in the wrestling match?
I actually thought he was kind of cool.
Really?
Like, yeah, obviously he's not a wrestler, but like...
There's something about a non-wrestler being like, fuck it, I'll do it anyway.
He's doing it anyway, and he's trying his best. And he's obviously, you know, he had an athletic background. He's a strong guy. It's, he wrestles kind of in the same way that Vince does. Like,
yes.
With no grace.
Yeah. You know, you say athletic background, but absolutely not an athlete, you know?
Yeah.
And that was absolutely demonstrated when they put him and China in the ring together.
Ew.
China giving Jim Ross a pedigree.
Oh, God, that's so scary.
Like, what decisions brought us to that point? But he's got a pretty impressive win-loss record. More often than not, Jim Ross ends up victorious in his wrestling matches, it seems, you know?
Yeah, but the thing I really liked about seeing Jim Ross, especially here as a wrestler, is he's got such swagger.
Yeah.
He's a cool guy, and he's sexy as well.
Sexy?
Oh, absolutely.
What is it? It's about the fact that he's got that, like, kind of, you know... I know I'm not a fighter, but I'm going to do it anyways. It's kind of because he feels brave in the face of something scary happening to him.
I think it's partly that. There's a righteousness about his anger, which is very compelling.
For sure.
But also there's a twinkle in his eye, there's a confidence, there's a here we fucking go. It's a John Wayne. Like, he's just very cool.
Courage is being scared to death, but settling up anyway.
Exactly.
It's on to drink out of my coffee mug every morning that has that inside. So yeah, it's a big emotive moment, I think it was. And for me as a kid, that's the thing, as a kid, it worked.
Yeah.
You know, almost every time they put Jim in the ring, I was like, oh my fucking God, seriously? No. That's just for me in WrestleMania 2000. You won't be able to hang with Triple H. You know?
There's a moment where they start brawling in the crowd and several guys just start actually choking Triple H.
Oh, yeah!
Just like full on.
They want revenge for Jim.
We're going to murder you.
Absolutely. I mean, if I was in the crowd at the time, I would have tried to choke him. Honestly, I would have come right for him.
You would have been a child. These are fully grown men.
If I was a fully grown man at the time, Joe, I would have tried to choke him as well. Give me here, Triple H. Why don't we break your arm? See how you like it, yeah? I think with most things in wrestling, it is a case of somewhat diminishing returns, though.
Yeah.
Because once he used Jim Ross the first time and it gets a big reaction, and in his book... The saddest thing about his book, the second autobiography, I'm like, I'm going to get the inside scoop about all these angles they made him do. I wonder what really went on. And pretty much every time without fail was like, they came up to me and they said, we need to get some heat on this guy. So, you know, we're in Oklahoma. That's your hometown. Or something to do with Steve Austin. You're his guy. He's your boy. And I went, I don't want to do it. But I did it anyway. And it was horrendous and I hated doing it. No one wants to see me. No, I look awful in the ring. I hate looking at myself.
Oh,
I didn't want to do it.
And it's so unfair
and
to
it's
himself.
Literally every single time they make him do something in the ring, he's like, fuck me, not again. And there comes a point where I think it's obvious that they're doing it now, not because the crowd are reacting. They're doing it because Vince McMahon's reacting backstage going, that's good shit. Ha ha ha, yeah. You know, like... Example of it being used well, but I think the last time it actually was effective was when Steve Austin turned heel and they had him kind of, you know, explain himself. Jim's like, what happened? And you get this, like, absolute bully psycho answer from Steve Austin. He beats the shit out of Jim Ross.
And then Vince comes out and is like, what are you doing? Do it more!
And, like, that segment, I remember as a kid, it traumatized me. Like, you know, it was fun. I remember, like, my cousin was like, you know, that was the point where he's like, I don't think I want to watch wrestling anymore. Like,
that's the thing. Like, I know there's a lot of talk about people turning off wrestling when Stone Cold turned heel. But I think it's more to do with him turning heel on Jim Ross, his best friend.
Like, you'd seen that segment before, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I have. I love it, honestly. I think it's amazing.
I mean, there's something really scary about it.
Yeah.
You know?
Stone Cold there is... I don't generally find him scary as a heel because I find him more goofy.
Yeah, because he did become kind of goofy later, but this early version
and the way he turns on Jim, especially because for me... I feel this best friend situationship between Stone Cold and JR it's always felt quite one-sided. Like, Jim Ross has always referred to Stone Cold as his best friend, but I've never heard of Stone Cold referring to Jim Ross as his best friend. And obviously part of that is because of the character. The character wouldn't do that. But it does feel very... I don't know, like, I feel a lot of us have experienced one-sided friendships.
Yeah, it
like
happens,
that,
for sure.
Where you feel, this is my best friend, but on some level, you know they don't feel the same way about you as you do about them.
I mean, it was kind of earth-shattering to me to read the book where it's like, yeah, you know, we're friends, but we don't like, you know, we don't talk about anything.
Yeah.
You know, we don't text each other. There's like, when they were in the company together, it's like, you know, we wouldn't talk about anything. We talk about, you know, sports or wrestling or his angle. We wouldn't talk about each other. We wouldn't talk about our feelings. We wouldn't talk about our wives. We wouldn't talk about anything like that.
That's how Jim Ross was raised.
And I think it's how both of them are.
Yeah,
in that
true.
mindset.
Stone Cold too.
And like, that was the thing. It was kind of like, you know, it was a very best professional friends, I guess.
But then to see Stone Cold turn on him and basically confirm that little fear that we all have in the back of our head of, this is how I really feel about you, actually. Yeah. And then to beat the shit out of him. And then also be encouraged to do that by the evil billionaire,
the even bigger
boss,
bully,
Vince McMahon. Like, it's just...
It is like a nightmare.
It's like a nightmare, yeah.
It's like, not only am I not your friend, the fact that you ever thought I was your friend, and we've been laughing behind you the whole time.
And now everyone in this room, we're all laughing at you as well. They're going to watch it. Your boss is here to humiliate you.
What made it even scarier, and this was mind-blowing to me, was that because Steve Austin wanted this heel thing to go, like, proper, like, he was deadly serious. This is going to, like, this is what I want to do. This is the future. I'm going to put everything into this, and it has to be perfect. He was like, Jim was like genuinely scared about this segment, like when they were planning and all that, because he'd never gotten cut before. He bleeds in this segment, and Austin's like, yeah, I'll cut you, don't worry, I'll sort it out. And he's like, I don't really want to do this. Like, no, I'll cut you, don't worry, like, we're gonna do it. And he's like, yo, might catch you with a few out there as well, just so you know. And like, he beat the fuck out of him, like, and he stomped the shit out of him, and he cut him way deeper than he needed to.
That's the thing, because like,
and when he came back, he was like, "Oh, sorry about that, kid. Hit you a couple times." He's like, he beat the shit out of me, like, he literally beat the shit out of me.
Yeah, because doesn't he have a black eye then the week
after? Yeah, and he's cut, like, there's a pool of blood.
He's properly beaten up.
And the difference between, like, hey, if you're a wrestler and you get busted open all the time, it's kind of, you know, you've never been cut before, and it's like, whoosh.
It's ironic as well that it's Steve Austin of all people, because obviously in the match he has with Brett, he's in a similar situation where he had never bladed before, and Brett is kind of like talking him through it. And Brett, I think at the time, wasn't he like, I'll do it for you? But it's way harder to blade someone else than it is to blade yourself, because you can't feel... You don't know their flesh as well as you know your own. You can't feel how deep you're going.
We'll get it in other episodes, but there's a lot of bad stories in wrestling, let's just say, about people letting other people cut them.
Oh, really?
Because generally the people who let other people cut them are people who don't want to be cut in the first place. And it's the worst type of compromise, let's just say.
Yeah.
That, I feel, was like kind of the peak of using JR effectively as a character. And I think it did get a reaction. But I think it was, you know...
At what cost?
At what cost, I guess I would say. And then it's like, it came to the point now where it's like, we're in Oklahoma City. What are they going to do to JR? Like, you're actively anticipating it. Like, the next time they're in Oklahoma, Vince McMahon wants someone to join the Kiss My Ass Club.
Right.
Which is obviously going to be Jim Ross. And they do this whole long-ass thing where it's like, no, we're not actually going to do it. Here comes The Undertaker to save Jim. And then it's like, Undertaker be like, I'm going to bully you as well. Get in your fucking knees, fat boy. Kiss his ass.
Great, the locker room leader joining in on the... This genuinely is.
Look, his family's over there. Look at him. Like.
I can only imagine, for a lot of, like, young kids, boys especially, who were maybe a little bit chubby, maybe bullied at home.
Whoa, boy.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, you would really relate to Jim Ross because he's really cool and he's really good at his job and he has his best friend Stone Cold.
And it means nothing.
And it means nothing. And you're nothing. And everyone thinks you're nothing. And oh my God, I can only imagine how heartbreaking it must have been. Like, no wonder so many people tune off television. Like, you're kind of taking your target audience and then going, that's you, that is, and you're nothing.
I know. I mean, I remember we watched that segment. I know there's a bit with Stone Cold at the start, but the whole thing lasts nearly 25 minutes, and that's how they end the show.
That's
and the crowd
ridiculous.
are dead silent. Yeah. They're just like awkward and like upset and confused. I'm like, there comes a point, and I think it happens so many times, where people are always too afraid to say it to him. But Vince McMahon like conflated what got him off with what the audience wanted.
Oh, absolutely. That's the trouble with surrounding yourself with sycophants.
Yes.
And being a billionaire. It's like no one will tell you the truth.
Get this weird masturbatory bullshit where you can kind of convince yourself that it's like, I mean, Did it make people hate Undertaker more? I mean, well, you know, he's the Undertaker. If he turned heel, they would have hated him anyway. You know, he's a good enough wrestler.
Exactly.
You know, was it really because Vince McMahon loved the idea of spanking his own bare ass with Jim Ross's cowboy hat and running around in front of his wife and family? Probably more likely, yeah. With regards to diminishing returns as well, Joe, I don't know if they got the reaction from the audience or the sympathy when they had Kane set old JR on fire.
No, I kind of love that though.
It's so shit.
It's a bit ridiculous.
I mean, you did say at the time that you thought it was a little bit cool, you know?
Yeah.
Him being set on fire, you know? I mean, did it...
I just wish it wasn't that Kane. Worst Kane,
like bald Kane.
Yeah,
you know.
but the interviews are really good because JR always asks the questions I want to ask.
Yeah.
Like, Kane, you look normal.
Yeah.
Stop going on about your burnt face. Get over it.
I think that's one of the best uses of JR always in his career. Like the interviews he did with Mankind as well, where they kind of fleshed out that backstory. He did them with Goldust as well. You know, he's done it a couple of times in AEW. I don't think it's ever quite worked, but if I was to fantasy book like an ideal role for him in modern wrestling, I think it would be that, like him doing those types of sit-down, you know, long-form interviews or whatever. But, you know, we get around 2005, and Jim has been given a promotion at this point, and the idea is that we're going to try and ease him out of talent relations, and he's given a title. It's like Executive Vice President of Business Strategies. And it's like, you know, better pay, bigger office, all that stuff. And he realizes, though, quite quickly that, I'm been put out to pasture because I'm much less involved with the actual decision-making process.
It's so strange to me that that anyone would think to put him out to pasture when he's still so good.
I think they work themselves, like, you book so many things where it's like, look at him, he's past it, he's old, he's pathetic.
Buy your own booking.
They
work yourself into a shoot.
They work themselves into a shoot. It happens all the time in wrestling. Vince McMahon, he was a lot more sensitive to it than most, I believe, because he had his army of sycophants. But, like, the thing about this is hilarious. He's replaced by John Laurinaitis, Johnny Ace.
For fuck's sake.
Another member of the non-disclosure agreement club.
Speak that man.
I know. So he's now head of talent relations. He's like someone who is...
Wait, I thought you meant on commentary.
No.
Talent relations? No. That's even worse.
Yeah, JR's still commentating. Johnny Ace is doing talent relations. The guy...
Jesus.
The guy who was like... had, let's just say, a bit of a reputation.
Yeah, no shit.
And right, whatever about Johnny Ace, people, everyone's got a story about him being a piece of shit, and, you know, him being crap, or him being stupid, or him being, you know, sexist. And lots of people have other stories about him that we can't hear about because they signed non-disclosure agreements. So there's this whole other part of him, you know. Bryan Danielson's father-in-law, can you believe it?
Yep.
But best thing I heard about this that made me fucking flip was that old Johnny Ace couldn't do the payroll. He didn't know how to do it. He couldn't do it. Oh, I don't know, these spreadsheets are kind of confusing, you know.
Boring.
Yeah, so guess what? For the next year and a half, JR kept doing it for him.
Why? Why would he agree
because
to do that?
Because he knew that if the payroll didn't get done, people wouldn't get paid. And
no,
it was
they
like,
would.
you know,
That's such shit. That's such bullshit. That's not true.
He reminded me of like my mum. Like, it's like my mum, like my mum who's like retired but still can't help but like helping out in the job and doing loads of stuff. It's like, just you've earned your break now.
Yeah,
and
you're
it's
allowed
like,
to just sit.
You know, I came across a lot of people who were like that in teaching, where it's like kind of, I don't know, organizations that thrive on people, you know, not just going above and beyond, being expected to do more than they should. And I felt that Jim was like...
Yeah, wrestling thrives on that too.
You're doing literally the one, like, non-cool part of this lad's job, for fuck's sake.
I can't imagine as well that it was valued very highly monetarily, that he was paid very well to do payroll admin.
No. And 2005 is another really hard year for him as well, because he's been pushed out of the office in that sense. But he has to have quite severe colon surgery because he's suspected he might have colon cancer.
Jesus.
Which means he has to get taken off TV. And they take him off TV in a really miserable way, where they have, like, the whole McMahon family come out, basically. And, like, they want Jim Ross to apologize because Steve Austin attacked them. And he's like, he'll only apologize for Linda being stunned because the rest of them are all no good rat bastards and Jezebels. And then Linda kicks him in the balls and fires him.
Yeah.
And he's off to have colon surgery. And I'm sure being kicked straight in the balls right before colon surgery.
Oh, God, I hadn't even thought about that.
What follows is one of the strangest, long-form, cruel bits of television ever. Imagine Katie Vick, except that it was somehow targeted at someone for real. Like Katie Vick was a real person or something like that. In that it's really out of step, really gross, and just not funny.
Crude, juvenile, but not in fun ways. Like just like, ugh. I don't know, it's like when a family member you don't like gets really drunk and starts like telling loads of really off-colour jokes that only they find funny, and everyone else is like, this is really weird.
You've killed the atmosphere of this wrestling show, brackets family gathering.
Yeah.
So JR is literally a day or two out of surgery, having like really, he had to have a large portion of his colon removed.
Oh my God, that's so horrible. Oh my God.
This is like, we're talking about pretty much, life or death stuff here. This is really serious, and really bad.
Not to mention all the lifestyle changes you have to have if you've had colon surgery. You can't eat normal food.
And,
oh my God, that's so
I think as well, if you'd suffered Bell's palsy at that point multiple times, you'd be concerned about, major surgery is obviously going to be maybe a stressor and all that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, tell me what happens here with Dr. Heine now. I know that we all love Vince McMahon, and we like to see him have a good time, don't we, folks? So this is like a special long part of the show for you to tell us how you really feel. I mean, I'm not sure what the point of this is. That's the thing. It's like, this is the most chaotic thing I think Vince has ever done, because there's no payoff for this.
No, exactly. It's pointless.
Stone Cold is retired for at least 3 years at this point as well, keep in mind. He ain't coming back to save him. There is no new guy who helps Jim Ross. This is just literally kicking a man who is down, and he's down because he's had colon surgery.
Yeah. And even within kayfabe, none of this makes sense. Like, it's just infuriating to see.
I'm starting to think that Dr. Heine's not a real medical professional, Joe.
So they're in a hospital, and they're saying that Jim Ross, yes, they name him Jim Ross. There he is. They've got a mannequin or something.
With a cowboy hat on it.
A bunch of cushions with a cowboy hat and a big fake arse.
And as soon as
up in the air.
Soon as they unfurl the arse, they literally go.
Yeah, make fart sounds.
Look, it's a bum.
Yeah.
That's the level we're dealing with here. Set your expectations.
That's the funniest part of this whole segment. It's all downhill from there.
Yeah, you can't rise above the solitary fart at the start. And this is, I think, I lost count of how many things he takes out of his ass.
Oh, well, I've got a full list. I made a note of every single one.
Poor Joe.
First of all, though, I want to talk about the staff involved. So we've got a nurse.
Yeah.
Very sexy nurse. We're talking Enema of the State album cover art, full sexy nurse.
Right off the shelf, the Ann Summers nurse's outfit.
Sexy nurse's outfit.
And also as well, this role, they felt that it was inappropriate for any of their actual female performers to be involved in. I like to think they were like,
no, this is below me.
No.
Put me back in the gravy bowl match, for fuck's sake. Anything but this.
I'll be in the pudding later on, but I don't do
not
this. So no one will take the mantle of nurse Slobberknocker, who remains an unknown quantity.
Slobberknockers, Kevin.
Sorry.
It's boobs.
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 Fucking hell. How about that?
See, it's very clever.
It's layered.
I don't understand, though, who is Dr. Heine? Because it seems to be Vince McMahon.
Well, many people don't know where Dr. Heine ends and the character of Vince McMahon begins. Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes when I look in the mirror, I just see Dr. Heine looking back at me.
This is referred to as Dr. Heine.
Dr. Heine.
But it is just Vince McMahon.
It's my new original character.
It's not like he's acting.
No, he's just being Vince.
He's just being himself, being juvenile.
He is having the time of his life.
He's having so much fun. He's with a sexy lady with big boobs. He gets to make fun of Jim Ross. He gets to make fart jokes. For ages. So, okay, rundown. So, yeah, we have the massive fake arse, which immediately farts. Then the arse starts making gurgling noises.
Yeah, the sound effects in this, it's like you've got proper like wet manipulation.
Yeah. But like also
non-stop
diarrhea sounds.
Toilet flushes. You know.
JR's theme tune.
Yeah, loads of JR sound bites. I will say the only upside of this is that it made me genuinely think that it had been somehow influenced by the rap song of JR's "My Ass," of which we've been walking around singing the Sooners Charge song, and now and then Joe will just turn around to me like,
"My ass."
30 men will enter my ass.
Earl Hebner is in my ass.
The lethal poison has been injected into my ass.
It's such a banger.
So thank you, Dr. Heine, for tangentially reminding us of a better thing.
Yeah. Okay, so, they use clips of JR doing commentary. And, oh shit, also, Vince McMahon is naked.
Yes.
Under the hospital gown.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know how many times you've seen this.
I've seen it too many times.
This is the only time you've realised he's naked under there.
Yeah, I was looking at Nurse Slobberknockers the whole time, obviously.
I don't blame you. That's why you need a woman in here to look at sexy Vince. Right.
What do we got coming out of the butt?
Okay, well, first of all, it's important that you lubricate your tools.
Yeah, so his hand gets lots of gel and...
No.
You know. Oh, wait, he gets a jackhammer, doesn't he? No?
The jackhammer comes later. First, they decide to lube up JR's arse with JR's own barbecue sauce.
Which is delicious, by the way.
It is delicious. I've had it. It's very yummy. Very good sauce. So yeah, they lube up the arse with the barbecue sauce. Then they pull out a football. Then they bring out the jackhammer.
Yeah.
The full roadworks tool. Dun, 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 whatever it's called. Then an owl?
That's the bit. He takes out an owl and goes, "What are you, a pervert?" And you were telling me it's like, oh, is it because of the Richard Gere,
hamster thing.
Hamster story? I'm like,
yeah.
But it's an owl.
So maybe, I was thinking about that, maybe the owl is because owls are wise and nerdy. So maybe that's why it's like a representation of Jim Ross.
We're
like,
going to get
he's
someone
kind of wise
coming
and
and explain.
nerdy.
Like, you guys never put an owl up your ass? What's wrong with you, milk toast vanilla losers? Come on.
Yeah, so they pull out an owl, and then they pull out a severed hand.
Yeah, it's bloody as well. That's the point they lost the audience. The audience did pop a little bit.
No, I think the owl was also a bit like, everyone's confused.
The bloody hand.
Which then Dr. Heine, aka Vince, explains then that the severed hand is Mae Young's other hand. Because if you don't know, I can't remember what episode. This is Mark Henry's episode?
That was in the Russo episode, I think.
The Russo episode.
Or the Mae Young episode, I guess.
I don't know.
Possibly.
But yeah, basically at one point, Mae Young gave birth to a hand. Right.
So there you go.
So this is the other hand that I guess she gave birth to.
That went into JR's ass.
It went to JR's ass.
This is one of these things that the more you look at it, the more confusing it gets, doesn't it? Yeah.
Then out comes a goldfish in an alive goldfish in a little bag.
I thought it was just a carrot in a bag of water, but no, it was a goldfish.
Then a football helmet and JR's theme music.
Okay.
Then he pulls out a novelty Stone Cold water bottle. And then finally he pulls out JR's own head. Complete with cowboy hat, even though JR on the table is wearing a cowboy hat, so...
The punchline is he's had his head up his ass this whole time. And of course, in stand-up comedy, we all know the rule of 14s. You mentioned 14 things. The 14th one is the funniest thing, obviously, there as well there. And then Vince McMahon, he gets, I think, turned on by this whole process.
Right, yeah. So then he shoves JR's lifeless body off the table and starts smelling the nurse's tits. I don't know why he does that.
Now we know why no one else wanted to be involved.
Yeah. And then he and the nurse lie on the table and they have sex.
On the table where Jim had just had his surgery. So, a couple of things about this. Firstly, that segment is 15 minutes long. That's 15 uninterrupted minutes.
I'm surprised it's that long because I thought it was longer.
It felt like an eternity.
It felt like a full WrestleMania 2-night pay-per-view. And
if you think about that, that's on Monday Night Raw. That had to be like a full quarter, like a full segment. Like, you know, there's ads, there's that, and then there's ads.
That's the thing I want to kind of think about a lot is the advertisers.
What would they... Yeah.
They paid a lot of money for this, and that's what they get.
Yeah, jeez, they didn't even get the Skittles read from JR or anything like that. They got that instead. That is something as well to bear in mind, is that Jim Ross decides after surgery, his wife Jan is looking after him, convalescing, and they're at home. And he's moved back to Oklahoma at this point, and he's like, "We'll turn on Raw. We'll see what's going on in the show. It'll cheer you up."
Oh my god, that's such a bad idea.
And they don't know this is coming. No one said, "Hey, JR, you know, something's gonna be on the show tonight." Maybe either say, "Don't watch it" or whatever. None of that.
No.
They turn on the show. They watch this, and he describes it as about the two of them just sat there in tears, and his wife being like, "Why are they like?" She just can't. Like, she's the most patient woman in the world, and she just doesn't know. They're both broken down in tears. Because they just don't get it.
One of the most traumatizing, stressful moments of his life has been reduced to the most juvenile, unnecessary, not even funny segment that no one even liked.
I know, it was for nothing.
With a target audience of juvenile teenage boys in 2005?
Yeah.
The peak of edgelords.
Yeah.
And even they didn't want
that
this.
was it. Like, it was so try hard, you know? And that was the thing. I remember watching wrestling at the time, just thinking it was so fucking lame, because it was like, we're trying so hard to be something that was like, you know, my memories of the Attitude Era were quite vivid at that point. It had only been like 4 or 5 years ago that it was, and you're doing this now, and it's like, just so cringe, so fucking bad. But like, here's the thing: is like, once he came back from his surgery, they brought him back for a special one night only. We'll bring him back at WrestleMania. And then we'll bring him back at Backlash. And then before you know it, he's back. He's a commentator again. Like his quality of work, they couldn't deny. So they kept invariably bringing him back after all of this. Another really hard thing that happened around this time, and I thought it was so short and so mean in a whole new way.
Yeah,
is that it's the 2008 draft, and we're thinking, hey, we're going to shake things up, and they say with this draft where people are going to go between Raw and SmackDown and ECW, anyone can be drafted. And all the top people know what's going to happen, but they don't tell the lower downs to want to keep it like spicy and keep everyone on edge.
So by top people, you mean like Vince and his cronies and the writers?
Oh no, I would say Batista, Triple H, Shawn Michaels. No one's moving those guys around without their prior say so. And they think the best thing to do live on air is announce that Jim Ross is no longer the voice of Monday Night Raw like he has been for the previous 11 years or whatever it is.
I feel you should explain why that is so significant to someone like Jim Ross, because that didn't. To me, I was like, well, so what? Like, obviously, Raw is the bigger show.
It's the show.
Yeah,
it's the flagship.
But it means so much more to him than just wrestling.
Oh yeah, it's like it's like Monday Night Wrestling is like, for him, it's like Monday Night Football.
Yeah,
it's not even it's not even about the show or the company. It's about like every Monday night, the idea that millions of people around America tune in to watch the wrestling. There's Jim. I know things are normal. He took that so seriously. Because
I imagine, as we were saying earlier, he watched football with his dad. He would do these commentary things with his dad.
Yeah.
That would have been probably the one moment of bonding he would get with his dad. And that's not just him. That's going to be so many other people in that situation.
Yeah.
One day a week where they get to hang out with their dad is when they get to watch the sports together.
Exactly. He thought, he always noticed when he would do commentary, he'd say, "We thank you so much for welcoming us into your homes." I always thought, I love that little touch, because he understood, like, it's a privilege. He takes it so seriously.
Yeah.
It's his sense of self-worth tied up in the prestige of what it is. And also, as well, it's like, the notoriety, the continuity of it.
And he's been doing it at this point for how long?
I mean, since, 1997, he would have been like the lead announcer. And this is, 2008. So, yeah, it would have been 11 years at that point.
Yeah.
Bits on and off and all, But he said that the one thing he always wanted to do was just keep doing that. If he had his way, he would have called Monday Night Raw, he would have given up everything else and kept doing that.
Like, he probably cares less about the pay-per-views, less about WrestleMania than he does about Monday Night Raw.
And he's had at this point, maybe, Joey Styles from ECW, he was brought in, and again, he was produced by Jim to become his own replacement. At one point, Vince McMahon decides he wants Mike Goldberg, the voice of UFC. He's going to come in and be Jim Ross's replacement. Mike Adamle, the host of American Gladiators, he's going to be Jim's replacement. And Jim has survived all of these guys now and thinks, okay, it's finally maybe settled down. And live on Monday Night Raw, they announce that Jim Ross is now going to be on SmackDown, and Michael Cole is now the voice of Monday Night Raw, and they didn't tell him, and the camera is like, what do you think about that, Jim?
Live reaction from Jim Ross now. Let's watch him cry. It was harder to watch than the Dr. Heine segment.
Yeah, because you can see him, like,
you can see how, oh my God, I literally can't imagine, again, having to do your job where you're on screen, and, like, I can't even imagine, like, doing this podcast if I was feeling a bit upset. I couldn't do it.
He's made the stronger stuff, though. This is the man who, when Owen Hart had just been announced died, it's like, Owen Hart is dead, Jim, and we're live in 3, 2, 1. He has to convey this,
But you can see, it really hammers home just how obviously harrowing this is for him, because you can see in all the other people on commentary, you've got Mick Foley there, you've got Michael Cole. So
you got Mick Foley there, he's the SmackDown announcer. You got Michael Cole, you got King.
Yeah.
And you have like Taz and Joey Styles over there as well. Everyone's there. Like,
And everyone looks like they've just been told your mum has died or whatever. Like it's everyone can immediately tell the tone.
And the crowd as well. The crowd are like, why are you doing this?
Yeah. And you can see as well the sympathy and like the guilt in a way from like Michael Cole because they literally have to get up and swap seats on air.
Oh my God.
And he looks mortified. He looks so upset on his behalf that he has to take his place.
And here's the thing, like I'm not going to do the whole thing about it because I feel we'll do a Michael Cole episode one day. But Michael Cole kind of was never embraced in that initial period. There was a period of like 3 or 4 years where the fans just not my voice of WWE.
Yeah.
And they did angles with him and Jim Ross for Jim trying to get his job back and all that. And it was always just to kind of like, get a bit of, buzz around the commentary desk thinking that they could get something out of it and do stuff with Jerry and Cole. But, like, I genuinely believe the reason why it took so long for the fans to warm up to Cole is because that was his starting point. It's like,
he took his spot.
We're getting rid of your favourite. Here he is, ungrateful. Mm-hmm. Like, they set him up to fail, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, people are like, why did they turn Michael Cole heel? Like, well, they did it because they had no other choice, because people hate him so much. Yeah. Because, he was the shit new... give my dad back. I don't want this shit new dad.
Yeah,
no
this
way.
weird nerdy stepdad.
I don't like him anymore.
Yeah, he's got a goatee. Yuck.
So 2009, he's brought over to SmackDown, and, it's an adjustment for him. He doesn't really like doing it. After a while, it's like he's no longer the play-by-play. Now he's going to be he's the color commentator. Todd Grisham, the young guy, he's the play-by-play. It's never really the same again after that.
Yeah.
In 2009, he has another third bout with Bell's palsy.
Oh my god, that's so unlucky.
And it was essentially the end of him as an active guy, where it's like, you're going to see him every week. As I said, they did use him as like kind of, a storyline thing. Like, I bought it hook, line, and sinker. And I felt like, it was like in the Bryan Danielson episode where I talked about, like, them kind of being like, making you feel angry on their behalf.
Yeah.
I said on the LTR podcast recently, like with JR, it was like, it's like Chuck and Community and all these like shows that were taken away from you. Like, you kind of tried to build a fever pitch for it by like kind of taking, is it going to come back? Oh, no, it's not. And he'd come back for bits here and there, but it was never ultimately to have him back as a full-time announcer, because Vince didn't want him as a full-time announcer.
Right.
One of the saddest things, I've said this phrase so many times, I'm literally making myself fucking sad now.
Oh.
It's WrestleMania 26. It's the follow-up from the last episode we did, Shawn and Undertaker. It's Shawn's retirement match, him and Taker. And it's WrestleMania 26, bigger than life. And they want one person to come out and to be the commentator just for the match. Bring back Jim Ross. He hasn't been back to work yet. He's ready to go. And they say to Jim, you know what? Get your tuxedo. You're going to WrestleMania 26. Bring the family. Bring the wife. Get ready, Jim. You're back in the big chair for the big match. And then on the day of the show, they say, Vince doesn't want you anymore. We're going to go with Matt Stryker
for fuck's sake,
the regular team instead. And Jim just has to sit and watch the match. And I think it's one of the sweetest things I think I've ever heard either man do. Even though it was Shawn's retirement, and even though it was a big night for him, at the end of that show, they didn't go to the post-WrestleMania party. The two of them went and they found Jim, and the three of them got a bottle of Jack Daniels. And they went and they set a little fire in the bin. They had a little party, just the three of them.
God.
And even though Shawn doesn't drink, he had his beer with him or whatever, and they all just sat around. They talked old stories and just shot the shit.
That's lovely.
And it was meant to be Shawn's night, and instead they made it about him. And I thought, no one else in the company was going to give him that. And I thought,
wow. You know what? That makes me like Shawn even more.
Yeah, like, it's a nice thing.
He really can be.
That's a selfless thing.
Yeah, he can be very... God, yeah, very thoughtful sometimes. That's so nice to think. Because as well, like, Jim Ross, he wouldn't have been, like, really, because he's not on the show, he wouldn't have been around much. You wouldn't have had much reason to think about him once you've got the match in your head.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you'd be, like, all, kind of up in the atmosphere and all that adrenaline stuff. You would automatically think, I'd go to that party and stuff. The fact that he even still, both of them were like, no, let's go seek out Jim.
I think it's really, really sweet.
That's so sweet. That's lovely. And
I think, his exit from the company in like 2014 then, it was not not particularly a great moment for him or for the company, because what eventually leads to him leaving the company, it's not because Vince is like, we don't want you on commentary anymore. He'd been brought back in 2011 for a few stints here and there and whatnot with the Michael Cole storyline, which will be in a future episode. It was the WWE 2K Sports panel that they did that ended up derailing his career and ended up costing him his job with the company. He was fired. And I'll tell you, it was one of the last times I got infuriated on behalf of a wrestler, you know? I remember Facebook messaging Kenny McIntosh from Inside the Ropes at like 1 a.m. going, have you got a login for Dave Meltzer's website? I need to find out what's happened. How have they fired Jim? What happened? And it was like, just a panel for the video game got out of hand. We watched the panel for the video game, which is still up in its full format to this day.
Yeah.
From streaming live on Twitch, which Jim Ross is like, they'll never get over. Very 2014 behavior. I mean, what did you reckon to to the proceedings at the 2K panel. It was a pretty chaotic evening, I think.
It was, but it was fun. It reminded me, actually, of when we record Subcultured. Like, it was very chaotic.
There'd been a few cocktails.
Everyone's relaxed and having a good time. And I don't understand really why this was blamed on, like, Jim Ross, because he definitely isn't as perfectly professional as he maybe used to be.
This is the sassy, like, quiet quitting, I don't give a fuck Jim Ross.
But yeah, exactly. This is an evening event. Lots of the other wrestlers have been drinking, and it's for a video game series, so I can kind of see why he's not putting it on the exact same pedestal as WrestleMania or Monday Night Raw or whatever.
And also, as well, it's not Jim Ross who decided to put the Nature Boy Ric Flair, who was steaming, by the way, and literally a few months prior had found his son dead of a heroin overdose.
Yeah.
You know, putting him and fill him full of liquor and go, let's talk about old stories on the stage.
Yeah.
Jesus, who would have thought it was a recipe for disaster, like?
But honestly, I blame Mick Foley.
Oh, really? I mean, Foley, this was I cringed so hard when we watched this bit, and you were like, rewind that, and...
Yeah.
So, Jim is asking everyone on the panel what their favourite WrestleMania memory is. Mm-hmm. In between fucking sassy put-downs and one-liners and everything like. He's basically like kind of a compare at a stand-up gig that's not been very well attended.
Yeah, he's having fun with it. He understands that this isn't the usual job.
He's not getting paid full tonight, but there are free drink coupons that he's been given for the bar. We thank you very much for that.
And he understands as well that it's video game fans are a different audience to wrestling fans.
And I think he identifies early on that the Nature Boy is maybe a little bit of a red flag at the moment, and maybe we should kind of work around him. But
and I think that's the case regardless of what had happened in Rick's life at that point, regardless of his, at that point, sobriety or otherwise. Like, Rick
needs to be managed and handled.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
He always has done.
But Mick Foley maybe made it 100 times worse.
100 times worse. JR, as silly as he is obviously feeling here, has a plan. He is organised. And he is going through the panel one by one by one. He starts off with Dolph Ziggler on the left and he works his way down. Mick Foley is second from the right and Rick is next to him on the far end. As he gets to Mick, just before Rick, obviously, gets to Mick and he's like, what's your WrestleMania moment? And Mick, instead of telling him what his WrestleMania moment is, goes, oh, hang on, Jim Ross. You've forgotten Ric Flair. You've forgotten him. You haven't let him tell his WrestleMania story.
And he does it in a way where it's like, sorry, there was meant to be an order of halloumi fries, on the table. It's not come.
It felt like when you have an after-school club and the parents are there and they're like, my child hasn't had a turn yet. And it's like, well, yeah, because no one's had a turn yet. Wait your turn. Just wait, okay?
And then you got Austin be like, goddamn Mick, cool it, kids.
Cool it.
The man's got a plan.
Even Ric Flair, when Mick calls out that Jim Ross has supposedly forgotten him, Rick's like, he's working to the main event.
Yeah.
Perfect way of putting it. That is exactly what Jim Ross was doing it. Yeah.
How you handle Ric Flair.
Yeah. But Mick totally threw everything out of it. It goes into disarray from that moment on, because then it becomes about Ric Flair, and Ric Flair starts telling all of his stories, and he's got thousands of them.
And Jim, throws his papers in the air. He walks off the stage
Paul
at
Heyman
one point.
rips them up.
It's just, it's like the Gong Show. It just becomes too chaotic for its own good.
I love it, though. It's so fun.
And I think at the end of it, what became apparent was that, we were going to fire you anyway, and you've just reminded me, actually, I was going to fire you. And that was it. And I remember at the time, he was fucking pissed, as you would be, because you think of all the things that they were going to fire him for, all the things they have fired him for, this one seems like just, ridiculous by comparison. And we watched 2 clips. There was one of him like a couple of months later on Sam Roberts' podcast, arms folded, bullshit. They said I was drinking, absolute bullshit.
I had one drink.
There was one drink. And it wasn't on me. It was bullshit. People got upset. And the arms, fold higher and higher.
Yeah.
And then we listened to him on Conrad's podcast last year, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I had like 10 drinks. There was free liquor backstage. It was flowing like water. I was drunk. He was drunk. It was terrible. Bad decision."
Even still, I don't think he deserves to be fired for it, because he may have been drunk. He did not act drunk.
No.
He acted silly, but he did not come across as a drunk person.
Yeah.
And I genuinely don't think there was much he could have done with that combination of people at that time of day with the circumstances that they were, it was an impossible situation to manage.
I mean, I think I remember at this time being really upset for him, and then just see like, you know, he immediately was like Mr. Positivity and back on the hustle. He's like, great, you know, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go start a podcast. This is in 2014.
All these things he probably wanted to do all this time.
He's like, wow, 2014, you're starting a podcast. Smart are you, Kevin Mahan, like, you know? Because, you know, he was one of the first, him and Austin, the two first wrestlers I remember doing it.
Yeah.
And, you know, he recognized it as a great platform for him. He's like, I'm going to call boxing. I'm going to call MMA. He became a contributor for, like, football websites, you know, in Oklahoma. He worked for New Japan Pro Wrestling, much to the chagrin of most New Japan Pro Wrestling because he didn't know anything, like, he didn't know any of the names, he didn't give a shit. But, you know, he at least was able to at least kind of prove that, look, I don't need WWE anymore.
Yeah.
And I think when you are bullied by a company or bullied by an individual, there's nothing quite as empowering as being able to be like, I don't need them.
Yeah, I'm free.
I'm free, you know? And I thought that was like, I remember not liking nearly any of the things that he was doing, but still being like, I'm happy that you just get to do you.
Yeah.
You know, no one's telling you what to do. You're not being bullied. Hell, you might even get to bully someone now, like, you know? You can bully the New Japan Pro Wrestling American audience. How about that, like, you know? I think as well, WWE realized at this point that there was value in bringing him back as, like, maybe, you know, a legend and stuff like that. He'd come back for kind of, you know, Legends appearances. And the one really nice thing I think they did was that his wife, Jan, who we mentioned previously, she passed away in one of the most tragic circumstances possible, which was that she just got hit by an oncoming driver. You know, she used to go around a little Vespa scooter that he bought for her, you know, and she just got, you know, guy didn't stop, ran her over. She was in intensive care, and they literally like had to ring him, and he had to, you know, rush to the hospital. Got to say his goodbyes. You know, they'd shaved her hair all off because she'd had so much, you know, contusions on her head, and
she was in a coma for like 2 days apparently before she died.
Then she died, like, and like, you know, fucking hell. That was the kind of the point where I realized, like, oh, like, shit, she's real. Like, you know, this ain't just a story, because the outpouring of grief from the wrestling world was like, it was more than if a member of the wrestling world themselves had died. I had not seen grief like that in a long time. And he was like, I gotta work. I'm going fucking crazy. And they did bring him back. They brought him back to WWE to call the main event of the WrestleMania that was Roman and The Undertaker. And I know it was a shit match.
That's not like, Jim's Ross' fault.
That's not his fault. And I think it probably got him out of that rush, you know, and it got him out of that headspace. He needed to work.
Yeah. And
I think as well, a lot of the stuff with him in recent years, I've maybe kind of... There's part of me that's always like, it's good for him. He's earned this. I think I'm very much at the moment, after doing this whole big episode talking about all the sad shit that's happened to him, that I'm going to be more forgiving than I would be on a random pay-per-view review of some of his work, say, in AEW.
Right, yeah.
Because I feel like if you listen to me and you talk about him in AEW pay-per-views...
Yeah, we don't go gently.
What's the issue with him in AEW? Or what, you know, I know it's not been your brand, really, at points. I know it's more my kind of a show. But I think we both agree that JR has struggled at the best of times.
Absolutely. I mean, my main issues with him are the blunders, like the big issues. Like, I think lots of people are sick of him, like people like you who kind of have to hear him a lot. You get sick of him because he's very low energy now. Yeah. He has like almost no passion left for this business. He
said in the Hall of Fame, passion is contagious. And so is the lack of it.
That's very true.
That addresses both the highs and lows of his career.
Absolutely, yeah.
And because so many times when like Excalibur would be like, Thunder Rosa and Tony Storm are here. Can you believe it? We got a thunderstorm on our hands. Huh, you come up with that one yourself? That's good. Huh.
Yeah, he's like very... And it's not... Because he can be quite scathing, you know, as is evidenced throughout his earlier career. He can turn it on. But it also kind of shows that that's a little bit of what he's actually like. You know, he is genuinely very grumpy.
Oh, yeah.
And,
ornery, I think, is the word I would use.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure.
And he can be he can come across quite cruel. But the things I take real issue with is, as I said, the blunders. So he called an episode of Dynamite WWE Dynamite.
Oh, Jesus.
One time.
Talk about, like, literally, I was like, that's it. I was like, going to turn off. It's like... Talk about a bad start, like, you know?
That's a bad mistake. But okay, fair enough. He is old, and he worked in WB for 30 years, or however long it was. Yeah. So fair enough. But then he said some really creepy shit about women.
Oh, yeah, that's gotten worse as well. Yeah. And the reason was because he'd say something like kind of, only the ladies are in here and they can go just as much as the man,
Yeah, which is it's condescending, but ultimately not cancelable, offense worthy.
And then it'd be like, do you like Penelope Ford, Jim? Because you're saying an awful lot of stuff about her. And then it's, him saying pervy fucking thirsty stuff, that's one thing. But now it's the fact that has been called out, and it's like, man, Penelope Ford, she's built, and I'll tell you what. And I know people on Twitter are going to come after me and say, oh, JR, you shouldn't be saying those things. All I'm saying is that, and then he goes and he explains it.
Makes it worse.
He acknowledges that there's a problem with it and you're not going to like it. And it's like, you know what? I'd actually, speaking as a man, duh. But like, I'd rather you say the pervy thing and just fucking rip off the Band-Aid than go on a fucking TED talk about why you said the pervy thing.
Yeah, I agree.
The cowboy emoji was used in this instance because she's physically attractive. And like, there ain't anything more awkward than talking about a dude who's fucking grieving hard.
Yeah.
Who's also thirsting hard.
Look, this is a physical business. It's a horny business.
Hey, this is a physical horny podcast, baby.
Yeah, and wrestling is an industry where lots of people get sexualized. I think that is kind of, to a point, part of what you should expect. But there's less on screen.
There's less creepy ways to do that.
There's less creepy ways to do it. That's the thing. And I refer to people like Sabu, because Sabu is very horny all the time.
On main.
And
he has also suffered tragedy and grieving as well.
He has, particularly with regards to his wife, yeah. And yet, Sabu manages to be horny in a way that isn't creepy. And I think, there are moments where JR maybe is less clumsy with the way he speaks. And, like, for example, he spoke about Natalia and her sister's OnlyFans. And that is I think, a very appropriate time to be horny. That's what they are
That's what it's for, yeah.
That's what it's for. That's how they are making money.
Are you horny and you like Natalia and her sister? Have I got a website for you?
Great. Go give us some money right now and you'll have a grand old time. That is the good place to be horny and the right people, because they consent to that. They want that. That's part of their advertising.
It's not on main, is it?
It's not on main. My issue is when he comes out with things like wishing certain female wrestlers have wardrobe malfunctions on air. That is fucked up. That's incredibly creepy. It's very cruel as well, because a wardrobe malfunction can literally destroy a person's career.
Yeah.
It's for most women, I would say that's their worst nightmare for competitors, especially, seeing as he will have commentated during a time when women's ring gear was not designed with wrestling in mind. It was designed to be titillating.
Yeah.
So they didn't have the full support. Wardrobe malfunctions happened a lot more often, and it was very humiliating for these women.
Yeah.
And there he is, willy-nilly going around going, oh, I wish she'd have a humiliating moment that destroys her career. Like, that is fucked.
I just think
don't say that shit.
There's no filter now, it feels
No, there's no filter.
I mean, case in point, I'll never forget it. It's one of the earlier AEW pay-per-views. And I remember us being bamboozled because he mentioned teeth like 4 times.
He's obsessed with teeth.
He's like, look at Matt Hardy, look at the chompers on him. Like, what are you talking about? And it's like, there was times during the pandemic as well where I thought AEW were like, I thought they ran circles around WWE during the pandemic era.
Oh, yeah.
If there was ever a time where the quality difference was more noticeable, it was there, because I just thought their approach was more refreshing. But hot Jim Ross in Daly's place, getting
Florida.
warm, getting humid, and it's like,
and he hasn't got that crowd as well to like listen to and play off of.
And like there's, Hangman Adam Page, probably one of my favorite wrestlers in the world right now. When he comes out, he's like, it's the cowboy. I'm like, yeah, that's it. He's the cowboy. It's like your granddad now. And I think there is a place for him in wrestling. And I think the idea that if you're old, you can't be an announcer is obviously not the case, because we got Tony Schiavone, who's like maybe a couple of years younger than him, who's doing the best work of his career in my mind.
He's so good in comparison as well. Like, but that's the thing.
I feel like they're scared to challenge him and say, hey, what about this, Jim? It's like, just go do your thing, Jim. You're great.
For me, it just feels like he's not having fun. And it's like, well, why would I want you? If you're not even good at your job now, why would I want you there if you're not having fun? Like, for me, I can put up with a level of unprofessionalism so long as it seems you're having a good time, because I find that infectious.
I find, the modern style for someone like him, it could be a bit overwhelming. I get that.
Yeah.
I'll never forget.
And it's a new company as well. For someone like him he puts so much importance into the long-term storytelling and booking of wrestlers. AEW doesn't have that as much, but even still, this is your opportunity, Jim, to come up with this, to build it yourself.
I just like, I think back to when for whatever reason, when I ordered the Ric Flair's last match pay-per-view, which was That's
a mistake.
That was it's going right on the tax bill, that one. Like, but I remember they had brought in, it was like one of the Crockett's who used to run, Crockett Promotions back in the day, and he literally hadn't watched wrestling in like 30 years. And they put him on as one of the commentators, and like, they'd have like fucking Bandito and Ray Phoenix, these, high end, like the flippitiest of the flippity flip wrestlers. And like they do this crazy modern style match earlier in the show, and the only thing he'd say on commentary was like, what? Because he was just so blown away by how the game had changed while he was away. And he was all for it. He didn't understand it. He didn't know what was going on. But it was like, all I can say is, my mind is blown. And I was like, fucking hell, you know what? Having the L Boy on there just been blown away was so great. But seeing Jim there, and like the Young Bucks are like doing a backflip pile driver to the outside, and it's all crazy. And he's just doesn't give a shit.
No.
It's like he's jaded.
Yeah, he is jaded.
And I don't think you could be in that career as long as that and not be at that point, maybe.
Especially what he's been through and how he's been treated professionally. Like, he deserves to be jaded, but just because he deserves to feel jaded does not mean he then deserves to have a job where he gets to act jaded. Like, you still have to kind of do your job well, please.
There's a little nugget that I think might make it make sense. Other than Jim Ross, the other name that's touted as being the greatest voice of wrestling of all time was Gordon Soley. He would have been the announcer that people watched. Kind of, he was the kind of NWA announcer back in the day, and he had that very classic. When John Cena was doing his Latin scatterran, it's that classic voice, and Gordon Soley would be the man who would be very very efficient and speak eloquently and concisely and all that. But Gordon, in his later years, like, he hit the bottle hard. He had serious problems with alcohol, and like JR noticed, when he had to work with him, it's like, oh my god, he's showing up like kind of drunk, and there were people like, oh, we can't be drinking and all that jazz. And then if he didn't drink, he couldn't call matches basically.
Yeah.
So Jim Ross was like, in his book, he's like, I sat there with Gordon Soley, and I, with pride, we poured him a drink, put him under the desk, and like, you go to work, because he had such respect for him. That even at like 10% capacity, he thought it's an honor for him to be there and to have one last hurrah. And I kind of feel like he thinks he's come full circle now. Or maybe the other people think like, hey, fuck it, I know he's not great, but it's an honor for him to be here. Maybe I can't speak for Excalibur or any of the other announcers. That maybe just him being there is like this kind of brand of authenticity. And we the wrestling business owes it to him to make him feel like Jim Ross for the last few hurrahs.
I just feel wrestling has that problem in so many times and places. Like, and with like the Ric Flair's last match, like, yeah, okay, he's earned the opportunity to do that to himself and his career.
But he's earned the respect of you to say when it's enough, know?
Yeah, like at what cost? Like for him to keep coming back and basically essentially undo his legacy. And it will get to a point now soon where young people only have those memories of him being kind of shit.
I think we've had tweets from people along those lines where they're like, "Hey, I didn't grow up with him, and he sucks."
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm not at the point now with him where I could be like, "Hey, no, hang on a second," because like, for me, I can tell you from doing podcasts about it, the last argument-winning thing you can ever do in wrestling is be like, here's a list of 10 things to go watch. Like, oh, great, I'll do the homework and come to the conclusion that you won the argument then. People care about now. They care about what they hear and what they see and what they feel. What they feel. And I feel, he had a cancer scare, last year with skin cancer. He was in for treatment, and, he looked like he'd been through the ringer, once again. He has made rumblings in the last year, and that's why we're doing this episode, that maybe he'll be retiring soon or winding down. They have in AEW, we notice, they brought him out in the second half of the pay-per-view.
Genius. That is so clever. And he was
better than ever on AEW,
absolutely,
for sure.
The best he's ever been in AEW.
Yeah.
Like, not quite, peak Jim Ross, but, this is 20 years from then, so...
The best you could hope for, I think.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think, WWE are onto something. The big main events, if he comes out...
The main event, having Jim Ross, if he's got passion about the feud and the match, coming out just for the main event, I think is really smart, because it will make it feel legendary and iconic.
And it'll make the fans appreciate it a bit more,
yeah.
Because the idea of like a generation of fans thinking he's like the lad who talks about teeth and tits, like that makes me very fucking sad indeed. And I feel like I'm more, as I said, being through his career, everyone's got to pay, Cole Cabana talked about the life tax, and I know he's had another couple of goes at that recently, and a lot of people in wrestling, it feels like we talk about, have been through the hardships. I can't think of someone who's disproportionately had more hardship in wrestling and never stepped foot in the ring, willingly, I guess.
Yeah.
Than good old JR.
Yeah.
It's a sad story, but I think the fact that it didn't make him run from the hills. I mean, if I was Jim Ross, I would have been out the fucking door in
me too.
in the probably in the 70s, yes, alone the 80s.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, alone the multiple firings. Like the amount of times where like you and I were going through our notes being like, wait, he was fired again?
That's the thing.
He's considered the best.
He got fired twice for having Bell's palsy, and the third time he got Bell's palsy, he got taken off commentary. He's punished every time for things beyond his control, which don't even affect his ability to do his job.
But I think he's probably one of those last true links. You mentioned there now about the generations, you want to talk about generational talent. This guy's been through several of them. Can't think of anyone else. Him, maybe Dustin Rhodes is in there in that category as well. Someone who's kind of been around for a long time.
He's been around, but he's not as big a slice of the pie.
That's true.
Jim Ross is so iconic.
And you know what as well, we mentioned right at the start, and it's a nice thing to put a little button on this bit here. Someone asked JR a while back on his podcast, like, what do you think you've become such like a cultural icon? Like, you can't go on TikTok or Snapchat or Instagram or YouTube Shorts and not help but see your voice tacked onto all these great things, and like, your voice is everywhere. And he's like, I'm here to see a penny for it. Where's my paycheck? He's just like,
Jim Ross, get on TikTok.
I know, but he's just like kind of like, the fuck, like, you know? Yeah, I know, I'm great. Pay me.
Yeah, good for him. True wrestler.
I think there's a career for that man on Cameo and TikTok or whatever it is he wants to do.
If he's not on Cameo, I mean, he must be.
I think the JR brand is a lot stronger than he realizes.
I
hear he's getting into growing and distributing his own marijuana. So
good for him.
Slobber knocker buds coming your way, maybe.
I think that's a match made in heaven. Anyone in wrestling doing a marijuana business. Seems to be a lot of the older guys doing it as well.
Him and Kevin Nash.
Pleased
as punch.
Oh, they should do a blend.
Yeah, Sabu will be your first customer, like.
Yeah.
Well, that's enough about the life and times of Jim Ross. Let's get into some of your tweets about good old JR.
So, speaking about younger people who maybe aren't familiar with JR's more iconic period of his career, we have a tweet first up from Jenna ACY, who says, I feel like a real jerk because I know JR is beloved from his early career, but I've only ever known his work recently, and it's awful. Wrong names, wrong moves, missed cues, insensitive, or just bizarre comments. It feels like everyone else on the desk is working around him.
Yeah, I get that vibe for sure. It's kind of like,
Like, you talk about carrying a match, but I think carrying commentary is much harder because at least if you are carrying a match, you have total control over the situation. You can't do that with someone else talking all the time.
I can't be that sad, I guess, for... Like, I feel for you if that's all you know about him. It sucks. But I kind of feel like if you're a wrestling fan and you're only interested in the here and now, that's totally cool. But, like, I feel his body of work is so large and spans such a length of time that if you ever happen to say, like, I'm going to watch a WWE show from, anywhere between this, like, 15-year period, his work will probably speak for itself.
But that's the thing. Most people don't do that. Most people don't have a podcast about wrestling.
And, like, most people as well don't, like... I'm never gonna like put my brain in your head. I'm never gonna make you feel nostalgic for something the way that I can. I think it's like it's a fool's game. Like, and people get like so upset about people not liking something.
Oh yeah.
That they grew up with.
Losing
it's like,
battle.
Like if you didn't grow up with JR, I hate to say, you probably never really will get the full JR experience.
Yeah, I've accepted that. But I will never really love him the way you do.
Yeah.
Even though I appreciate him and his skills, he's not a part of my childhood. I don't hear him and feel nostalgic.
But were you shocked by the backstory about it? Like, did you know that this was like... I'm sure you knew Vince McMahon, the Bully and all that, the name would come up, but were you shocked by the extent to which there was the kind of incidents along the road?
I was shocked because I have read articles before about terrible things Vince has done. When we did the Vince episode, I did a lot of research about Vince's impact on other human beings as a human being himself. And there's so much shit he's done to people over the years. Jim Ross has his own articles just about shit Vince has done to him. And there's stuff we've not even mentioned in this episode. We could have gone on another couple of hours talking about all the shit Vince has done that's so cruel.
We would have veered into depressing territory, I believe, if we got at that point.
Yeah.
But like, I think the thing I need to mention as well with Vince and JR is like they have this like unspoken great respect for each other. There is a foreword from Vince in Jim's book that is literally like he's writing a reference for the greatest employee he ever had. And one night in like, I think it was 2011 or 12, they did eventually do like a Jim Ross appreciation night in Oklahoma. And the whole time I was like, here it comes. They're going to dump shit on him. They're going to pie him. They're going to kill him. They're going to, pull his pants down. And it was literally just people being like, Jim's the greatest. He's so amazing. And Vince did like a proper to camera, like, he's
great.
Least
he could fucking do.
I know, but it's like, is it easy to forget that in the wash? Yeah, it is. Because of all the other shits.
Yeah. Jenna continues. It seems to speak to a bigger issue that wrestling has, the unwillingness to retire because a big name remains a draw, even when the skills that made their name are long gone. JR is in a seat at the AEW desk that could be used to elevate the next great commentator. It's a real shame.
Well, there's probably two ways of looking at that. Firstly, it's like the people who are swapping channels, and when Dynamite, I guess he's on Rampage now, but when that show is playing, they go, oh, wait a minute, hang on, I used to watch wrestling back in the day. That's JR. Them versus the people who are watching the show going, this fucking commentary, man, fuck this, and they turn off the show. I'm not sure. That's a fine balance.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be confident swaying it one way or the other, but I think that,
this is why I think the good middle ground is just having him on for one
special events
match. Special events, yeah. Next up from Achoo, I Sneezed. I think Paul Heyman said that to get the best out of JR, you have to make him mad.
Hell yes.
I think this is also true from a kayfabe perspective. Some of JR's best stuff has come from when he has a storyline reason to be pissed off.
Oh, baby.
That's true, because he's a very good actor, which I think often gets unrecognised with commentators who get put in angles. Yes. Like Michael Cole, as much as I love him, is not much of an actor, which is part of his appeal. Yeah. JR is. He's a great actor. Oh, yeah. He genuinely is very gifted in that regard.
I mean, we've watched so many times the compilation of him chastising Triple H.
Yeah.
I remember when, the build up to that Shawn Michaels Triple H SummerSlam match from our last episode where he gets hitting the hammer in the back and he's like, not his back! You son of a bitch, have you got no soul? Are you from this planet?
Now from Dark Mortimer, not much of a JR story, but me and the family barely missed seeing him in his restaurant back in 2007. The food was good, plus a lot of wrestling items displayed on the wall of the restaurant.
JR's Barbecue in Norman, Oklahoma, I was obsessed with this because I was reading his blog week to week back in the early 90s, and he'd be like, yeah, I got the plans in, the restaurant's coming. I'm like, he's going to have a fucking restaurant.
Talk about going from a hard business to a hard business.
I know.
Wow.
I know. And I mean, just reading the blog, and it eventually closed up shop. It was kind of, the idea was that we'll use the JR brand, we'll have sauces, we'll have the restaurant. It's going to be a whole, big business, essentially. I know the sauces are still going and all that. They are tasty, I will say. But like for me, the restaurant and the problems that they had along the way, there was like planning problems, and they tried to get the wrestling crowd. I think people thought it was kind of a sports bar, like kind of a Hooters vibe, loads of shit on the walls, and he wanted it to be kind of a home family style restaurant. It just always, for me, my ideal would have been Gordon Ramsay going there for kitchen nightmares,
No, Jim Ross doesn't deserve that. The bullying.
Jim, to have a successful business, you must reconcile with your father figure, Vince McMahon.
Puts them both in a boxing match for some reason.
I hate you.
Now from Broly Adonis DC, he has so many iconic lines, and he's helped make matches and moments feel even bigger. A perfect example of that is from King of the Ring 98 when Mankind flew off the Hell in a Cell. Good God Almighty, that killed him! As God is my witness, he is broken in half!
Oh, baby. I mean, compare that to Michael Cole when Shane McMahon was thrown off the cell reading the line, for the love of mankind, Who was in the moment there? The lad who had his notes? Or for me, with Jim Ross, it's like that passion. It's the difference between speaking from the heart and speaking really well with notes.
Yeah.
But it's amazing. There's no comparison.
It's amazing how he is able to speak so eloquently and poetically, even though he has no notes. I know. And he's doing it straight from the heart. Like, I feel if I did that I would end up not saying very much at all because I'd be like, oh, I want to make this moment iconic. And then I'd overthink it and I'd be like, oh God, nah, what? It's just amazing the way he's just able to feel the moment and just say what he's feeling.
He's one of those people I think that was, growing up was just constantly calling matches in his head. There's this big pool of wrestle stuff in there.
It's just right there.
So it can flow out at any given moment, Special shout out as well for the not iconic trying to get over moments that he had, such as calling Undertaker Booger Red and "Who's your daddy?" It was like a 2-month period where if anyone did a big move, he'd go, "Who is your daddy?"
Now from Kyle Daredevil. JR's passion made something like Jeff Hardy versus The Undertaker's ladder match so incredible.
Yes.
It's hard to describe, but when good old JR is on, there's no one quite like him. Plus, he's got a pinfall victory over Triple H. How many commentators can say that?
Yeah, you want to check out that win-loss record? Yeah. I mean, good lord. He beat the coach in a country whipping match. Him and Austin beat Triple H in China. Him and King, I think they only lost to Swagger and Cole that match that we watched. Yeah. They took on Lance Storm and William Regal in a tag. What the fuck? Like, check him out in Cage Match. That man's got you're gonna bring back the rankings in AEW. Yeah, Jim Ross is gonna be in that title contention. Like,
and what is that iconic line he said about Jeff Hardy climbing the ladder?
Climb the ladder, Cage. Make yourself famous. My friend Paddy described that line as being so powerful it makes you forget the outcome of the match every time you watch it. Very, very well put.
Next up from the Bobby Cash, Jim Ross is the best commentator of all time, if his time ended in 2008. Ever since he was drafted from Raw to SmackDown live on air without his knowledge, his passion for commentary seemed to die.
I think that's the moment, if you're to pinpoint it, for sure.
But his partnership with King is legendary and is essentially the soundtrack to the Attitude Era.
Yeah, and I think, Jim Ross, he can be the voice of... I think he can be the voice of wrestling. I would argue now at this point, with looking into the future as well, the next 5-10 years, it's pretty undeniable that Michael Cole is now the voice of the WWE.
Yeah.
Jim Ross is the voice of wrestling.
Yes.
But Cole is... He is the ideal announcer for both Vince and now Triple H, I think, and to see actually as well him over the years get better and better and better.
It's been wonderful to see.
The thing about Jim Ross is that the man is, he's such a larger than life presence at that commentary desk that everyone else is kind of in orbit around him. I think him being gone and there being that length of time now, and let Michael Cole finally, in his 50s, take a breath and be like, What's my voice? What am I? And we're seeing that more and more and more now.
Especially now Vince is gone.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Michael Cole and Pat McAfee.
That's magic.
I'm missing that hard at the moment in November 2022. But like,
congratulations to Pat McAfee on the birth of his child. By the way,
there we go. We were definitely time stamping.
Next from Paul D. Watts. Not a fave call or segment here, but what I think made Jim Ross so good was that he had so much personality. Whereas a lot of commentators can feel like set dressing, JR was another character on the show. And that, with his immense passion, is why I think he's so beloved.
Oh yeah, I mean, he's a character. I kind of... It's one of the reasons why I kind of like Excalibur in AEW. Is like, I like that there's a man in a mask. I like... there to be
characters.
I like to be characters. I want variation. I want, like, this guy's a former wrestler. This guy's just kind of a, he's quirky, he's weird, or whatever it is. That's one thing I don't like about WWE. There's too many announcers whose gimmick is, I'm the shiny announcer. Yeah. That's why I love Byron Saxton. He's got a defined role. He's he's that guy. Like, he's kind of nerdy, nice,
it's weird. Next up from Will is also young. JR became the voice of wrestling to countless wrestling fans decades ago through sheer gravitas and passion. It frustrates me to hear him today, but I can relate to him not wanting to give up what is his passion in life. One of the GOATs going on well after his peak.
Yeah, I mean, it happens with wrestlers in the ring, and I think we're seeing it in real time happening with an announcer. But when you're past your prime and everyone's too afraid to ask you to leave the dance, it's hard, But I'm thinking that he's going to be winding up soon. I think so. We'll do a revisited over on the Patreon page if and when that does happen. But I don't see him wanting to pursue it if he can't be in one of the big leagues.
Yeah.
And I think that's where they're at the moment now. I think he'll never stop podcasting. I think that'll never stop.
Nah, that's in him forever. Next up from James D. Leach. Absolute gold in his heyday. He could elevate a match from good to great and from great to legendary. His enthusiasm was infectious and his selling of heels and faces rivaled that of the best in-ring workers. That's so true.
Yeah.
Sadly, his lack of enthusiasm these days is equally infectious.
The yin and the yang, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. Finally now from Refs as Wizards, much like how certain songs are the soundtrack to a particular part of your life, I feel like JR's commentary is the equivalent for wrestling. You simply can't see or imagine certain moments without also hearing his voice punctuating that moment.
I'm not sure if that's for every wrestling fan, but that's for a large amount.
I mean, that is...
Dare I say a majority. I mean, it's for you, is it? That's interesting.
But, like, even moments he wasn't there for, I
know.
still hear his voice.
Because it's a more fun voice, right?
It's a great voice, yeah. And I, like, in my mind, I take those iconic moments from, like, Hell in a Cell or the Undertaker Jeff Hardy match. I take those lines and I apply them to other matches as well. And that's really good commentary. If you can, like, penetrate that fact where you're making your audience enjoy other matches you're not a part of because of your influence.
People do that. People literally cut out his commentary and they put it over other matches.
Wow.
They do it, like, you know, it's insane. I don't think anyone's ever done that for, like, Gorilla Monsoon or Michael Cole or anyone else. Like, oh my. Yeah, that's why I want to cut King of the Ring 98 and Mankind gets thrown off the Hell in a Cell. Oh my. Well, a different episode, a really interesting topic to cover, and I'm really glad that we've able to kind of, flesh out a little bit more of the story. And like, there's a lot to go there. I think it's someone whose tale needs to be told in full. I think you can kind of gloss over a lot of the details, and I feel like even though we've taken our time here, this is by no means a definitive account of JR, but I think we set out to at least give a little bit of flavor of like what this man was all about and his influence in wrestling, both, behind the announce desk and beyond. I think he is, as you rightly pointed out, Joe, I think one of the most, influential figures in modern history of wrestling, and I'm really excited about the next episode because
this is a different one.
This is very different, and JR will be a big old fan of this episode, folks. Let me tell you. Get the cowboy emojis at the ready here. Our next episode, after being so inspired by the lovely tales in the second half of Shawn Michaels' career, we're going to be looking in depth at the history, the influence, the impact, and the legacy of WCW's Nitro Girls.
Oh, I am so excited.
The first ever episode about one of wrestling's only ever committed dance troupes. We're going to be looking at the usage, the development, the people involved, who was involved, where they went, how it was used in the show. We're going to be watching a little bit of Nitro. We're going to be seeing how this was used. And Joe, I beg of you, please, with someone who did very well in her dance GCSEs, I'm excited to find out feedback about the type of dance we're seeing, who's got the skills, who's maybe phoning it in. All your favorites, folks. We're talking about Whisper. We're talking about Stacy Keibler.
Wait, Stacy Keibler was a Nitro girl?
Heck yes, Joe.
Wow.
We're even going to maybe dipping our toes into talking a little bit about Daphne, who's associated there as well. It is a heady brew of dancing, outfits, real-life wrestling drama, and some wrestling storylines as well. It is genuinely one of the most intriguing and different parts of wrestling. I'm always very excited to head down to WCW because I feel like we get things there that we don't see in any other company. Yeah. And this also kind of crosses over with Diamond Dallas Page a little bit as well. There's a lot. A little bit of Eric Bischoff in there as well. So, we might be getting our eyes on the Nitro Girls' musical career post WCW. Any thoughts, memories, favorite members, favorite outfits, favorite dance numbers, your history with the Nitro Girls using the hashtag #HowToNitroGirls. I cannot wait for you guys to see the artwork for this one from Dan. It is chef's kiss, going to be fabuloso. Yep. And as always, if you want to support this show, which we like to deliver to you for free with no ads, as always, it is entirely funded by our lovely backers over at Patreon, patreon.com/HowToWrestling, where you can give back to the show for as little as $5 a month, and most importantly, get access to a whole bevy of audio goodies. We got series like Pay-Per-View Classic. A most recent episode, we were looking at No Way Out 2003 for a special Triple H Punishment special, but we've also done WrestleMania 10, ECW December to December 2006, WrestleMania 17, Survivor Series 1998, a whole bunch of In Your Houses. It is one of our most beloved and our most fun series to do, I think.
Yeah, so it's great.
For that alone, I'd say it's worth checking out the Patreon. If you want it back for just 1 month to get access to the content, you can drop out whenever with no commitment. But until next time, It's going to be... I'm very excited about the next episode,
Me
Joe.
too.
I rejected the Nitro Girls outright when I was watching in the 90s.
I bet you did, because they were WCW.
And I regretted it every day since.
I bet you did, yeah.
Turns out my friend, who I used to play wrestling toys with, who liked to watch WCW as well, and said, the Nitro Girls, man. I was like, but they don't even wrestle. Turns out he knew all sorts.
Yeah, I bet.
We're going to get into it in our next episode. Until then, it's a goodbye from me, Kevin.
And a goodbye from me, Joe.
Boomer Soomer. We'll see you next time on How to Wrestling.
See ya.